Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight we step past the rusted gates into forgotten graveyards where silence isn't empty. It listens. These are 5 of the creepiest true stories from old cemeteries. Shadows that move without bodies, voices that whisper names they shouldn't know, and footsteps that follow when no one is there. This is a brand new channel, and my goal is 1,000 subscribers this month. But here's the strange part. Almost 90% of people who watch never subscribe. They just disappear into the dark. Don't be one of them. Hit that button now, because in this place, once you leave, you might not come back. Kill the lights. Mute the world. Let's begin. I used to think Boot Hill and Tombstone was a joke. The kind of roadside attraction that sells plastic sheriff badges and foam tumbleweeds. The place you drag your out-of-state cousin to and then eat chili in a theme restaurant. If you've never been, it sits on a little rise beyond the gift shop and the road noise. Brown desert pushing up against hundreds of white wooden markers and a scatter of old stones half swallowed by dirt. You can see the town from there if the heat isn't wiggling the air too much. The flat lines of the street and the bright awnings for staged gunfights. It's dry and honest and a little sad. That's how I remembered it from a trip years ago. When my cousin Mateo called and said he wanted to shoot some B-roll in southern Arizona for a little documentary, I said sure. I had the time, he had the camera. We both needed a break. We drove down in January after the holiday rush when the sky is big and colorless and the wind sneaks through seams in your clothes. Mateo had this idea for a short series about American graveyards that get turned into tourist draws. He wanted to film sunrise angles, get the way the light breaks over the markers. I was going to handle audio and hold reflectors and try not to trip over anything sacred. We got a cheap room at a motor court with doors that opened to the parking lot and a clerk named Kim who wore a wool hat even inside. She recommended the chili place just like I predicted. She also told us if we were set on filming at Boot Hill, we should talk to the caretaker first. He lives in the trailer past the gate, she said, sliding my key across the counter. He hates surprises and kids with Bluetooth speakers. He's nice otherwise, name's Earl. We stopped by the cemetery that afternoon. The gift shop was closed for winter hours. The gate creaked when I pushed it. Beyond it lay rows like a warped spreadsheet. Lester Moore, 4 slugs from a .44, no less, no more. Hung by mistake. Unknown. It would have been funny if the wind wasn't up and there weren't black ribbons of cloud dragging low over the Dragoon Mountains. A garden of markers. A field of rocks. We walked quiet. I tugged my beanie down and breathed that cold dust smell you get only in desert places like a paper bag left outside. The trailer sat off to the right. A short walk down a gravel lane with 2 cottonwoods scratching their fingers together. We knocked. After a minute, a man in his late 60s opened the door with his shoulder, a heavy plaid shirt and a belt worn shiny where his buckle hit it. "You Earl?" Mateo asked. "We're shooting a little doc, non-commercial. We want permission to film sunrise and evening. We'll stay out of the way." He squinted at us, past us, then at the camera case. "You won't move stones, you won't step on mounds." It wasn't a question, but we both said no. He looked satisfied in the way of someone who wanted to. Be annoyed, but couldn't quite find the reason. "Name's Earl McKenna, 27 years. Winter you can get in about any time after 8 in the morning. Evening we locked the gate around 5. If you want dusk, you come to me and I'll open it. You'll leave it like you found it. That's the rule." "Thank you," I said. "We appreciate it." He hooked a thumb over his shoulder. "You boys, from TV?" "No," Mateo said. "Just YouTube. We'll credit you." "That mean anything?" Earl asked. I shrugged. He smiled at that. He had a heavy way of smiling, like each time was manual labor. "Come on then. I'll show you something so you know what you're pointing those lenses at." He walked us back through the gate. The wind pushed dry grass into a hiss. At the entrance, there's a stout wooden post on the left, scarred dark with age. Earl tapped it with his knuckle. "People ask what burned this. They think lightning or kids with a bic. It's not that. I've sanded it back twice and it comes through again. You hear a lot of old stories working out here. Most are beer. One or two aren't. I leaned in. The black on the post wasn't a splash or a streak. It was a shape, rounded at the heel end and flared where fingers might be, long and high on, the wood at a height no one could touch without a ladder. It didn't look drawn. The grain had bubbled a little under it like heat had kissed it fast and hot. That's a handprint, Mateo said, and laughed because that sounded like nonsense. Earl didn't smile this time. In '78, there was a storm that rattled windows clean into town. Power out, phones out. Caretaker then was a man named Jennings. He used a kerosene lantern to walk the rows to check for folks who snuck in. Says he put the lantern on a rock by the gate while he ran to the trailer for a coat. When he came back, he found the wick burned to nothing and the glass still shining, like someone cupped a firefly in there. He panicked and threw it, and the glow hung in the air and drifted till it found a spot. An old grave no one visits. Then he says a hand touched the gate over his head and left that. He quit a month later, went to Bullhead City to sell boats. That's a good story, I said. We can work that in if you're comfortable. You can leave that part alone, he said, and I didn't argue because it wasn't a request. Then he added, almost like disappointing himself, but you should know it if you're asking to be here after dark. It's a different place when the sun's down. People smell like their perfumes and their work, and the wind smells like creosote and static, and sometimes the ground smells like it rained even when it didn't. I don't like a lantern in here. We promised we'd be careful. He stood there a second longer. You boys hungry? Go get chili. Come back at 4:30, and if the sky's clear, I'll let you have an hour. Chili tasted good after the road. Kim at the motor court asked if we'd gotten Earl on our good side. He saved a kid from a rattlesnake last year, she said, doesn't talk about it. She told us about the night watch deputy who checks on Earl sometimes, a woman named Salazar who grew up in Tombstone and never left. She married a guy who runs the stagecoach rides, Kim said, laughing. Everybody marries everybody here. Lot of names go back to mining days. The talk made me feel held in a small net, every knot touching every other knot. We weren't anonymous. I can't explain why that made me feel safer. Maybe because when people know your first name, they also know how to come looking if you don't come home. We were back at the cemetery by 4:20. Earl had a ring of keys and a mug of coffee. He unlocked the gate and let us in and left the padlock hanging. You call if you have trouble, he said. If I don't pick up, call the sheriffs. They'll send Salazar. She lives 5 minutes from here. Not because you're special, because I don't want to do paperwork. Mateo laughed and we moved fast. He did wide shots to catch the sky and tight shots on the carved wood and the pebbles around mounds. I ran levels, got clean wind for a baseline sample, then set the shotgun mic on a stand and tried to keep my fingers from going numb. Twilight in Arizona is mean. It looks friendly on Instagram. In real life, it feels like you're standing in the open while something sizes you. The gift shop's roofline turned black in the west. The markers stood like white teeth. I caught myself breathing, shallow, like I didn't want to disturb anyone. Dumb, I know, but that's the thought. At 5, Earl locked up, waved, and we promised we'd be back for sunrise. That was supposed to be the end of it. Mateo wanted a few seconds more of Blue Hour and joked we could bribe Earl with coffee if he yelled. He set the DSLR on a last angle and stepped back, and that's when something changed. I didn't see it. I heard it first. A soft, glassy sound, like a finger run around the rim of a tumbler. I checked the mic. No loose cable, no feedback. The sound came from my left, near the gate. It got stronger, a ring that wasn't quite musical. Do you hear that? I asked. Mateo didn't look up. We need 10 more seconds, he said. Then I smelled kerosene. You know it if you know it. A penny metal stink that catches behind your nose. I turned and saw a shape tucked against the base of the gatepost, a squat glass lantern I swore I hadn't seen a minute earlier. There was a hard shadow under it, even in low light. The flame inside was down to a pepper seed shivering, and as I watched it bent sideways and winked out. I waited in that held breath you do when your brain expects darkness. The glass stayed bright. Not white, not phone LED blue. It was the sort of yellow your eyes remember from sleeping porches or your grandfather's workshop bench, warm and patient. The wick was a black curl. The glow wasn't reflecting anything, it was just there. "Matteo," I said. "Hey, hey." He turned and saw it and said a word he doesn't say around his mother. Then he did what people like us do, which is aim the camera before doing anything else. He grabbed focus. He backed up a step, then forward. "The wick's gone," he said, voicing the obvious because you do that when your head needs anchoring. "How is it?" The glow drifted. That's the only verb I have. The lantern didn't move. The glass bright stayed where it was, like a small sun hung in front of it, and it rose a handful of inches and slid sideways, smooth as if someone carried it by the handle, except there was no handle and no someone. It moved away from the gate between the first two rows. The sound I'd heard, finger on a rim, followed it. I don't remember deciding to follow. I know I moved with it, and I know the part of my brain that could still talk was saying, "Don't step on mounds, don't step on mounds." The light drifted to a grave with no name left, only a bleached board and a scattering of stones. It hung there. The kerosene smell got stronger. I had the dumbest thought. If I cupped my hands around it, I could warm my fingers. Matteo reached out first. I grabbed his wrist without thinking. "Don't," I said. He shook me off. "It's not hot," he said, because the air around it didn't feel like anything. He put his palm near the glow. He turned it. He laughed once, short. He was about to say something cocky when his face changed. His laugh stuck like a hiccup. He closed his fingers and hissed. "Ow." "What?" I asked. "It's cold," he said, squeezing his hand in his other one. He kept repeating it like someone talking through Novocaine. "It's cold, cold, cold." He shook out his fingers. In the weak light, I saw the pale of his skin stand up where the glass wasn't. 5 little arcs like a ring of frost had kissed him, a shallow white brand, if that makes sense. He kept flexing. "It's numb," he said. That's when Earl's voice came from the gate. "Back away from that thing," he said in a tone I hadn't heard that day. It was even and hard, the way you talk to a stray dog with a story behind its eyes. He had one hand on the padlock and the other on the gate. His coffee mug was on the gravel. He looked taller than he had earlier, or maybe that's just how authority looks under a bad sky. He stepped inside and stopped. He didn't come near the light. He looked past it to the old blank grave. He said a name under his breath, a man's name I didn't catch. Then he said, louder, the way you might in church if you're not sure who you're addressing. "You found your way. That's enough now." The glow lifted, 5, 6, 7 feet, and without any fuss it slid to the gate and set itself right above Earl's head. He flinched and kept his hands down by his thighs. I smelled a burnt paper scent, not acrid, more like a page held over a candle until a brown patch blooms. The glow sank into the post, and all at once it wasn't there. Night came in that quick way night comes in the desert, like somebody threw a dark blanket over the world. The only light left was the security bulb on the gift shop and the soft halo from town. I exhaled so hard it made me cough. Earl shook himself like a man who'd stood up too fast. "Gate's closed," he said. "You're done for today." We didn't argue. I helped Matteo coil the mic cable with hands that felt like rubber bands. He kept flexing his right hand and blowing on his palm. Earl walked us out and shut the gate with a careful click. The padlock seemed too small for its job. He picked up the old lantern, the glass now unremarkable, the wick a dead curl. He cradled it like a baby bird and carried it toward his trailer. "Don't come back after dark," he said without turning. "If you need dawn, be here at 6:30 and knock." We got to the car and sat there in the dark, doors closed, not starting it. I could hear Matteo breathing in little hitches. I smelled kerosene on my jacket and didn't know if it was real or my brain poking me. 5 minutes passed and then 10. When I finally turned the key, the radio came on loud enough to make both of us jump. We laughed because we had to. Then, I saw something near the edge of the headlight beam where the gravel met the road. It was smaller than a person and not moving. A cat, I thought. A bag. A rock. The light caught glass. It was a second lantern, the same squat kind, the same wire handle set neatly on the ground as if someone had placed it there for us. I wanted to point and swear. I didn't. I put the car in reverse and drove away without rolling down the windows, to check. Fear is a muscle you don't know you have until it locks. Back at the motor court, Kim looked up from a true crime video on her phone and said nothing about our faces. I hope that meant we looked normal. In the room, Mateo held his hand up to the light. A white ring arced across his palm like a necklace made of breath on winter glass. It wasn't a blister. It wasn't raised. It looked like something had pressed the blood out and left emptiness. He kept pressing his thumb into it like you do a bruise to tell if it's real. We didn't talk much. I took a hot shower and still smelled kerosene. I stuck my head out the door to clear it and caught cold air and a faint noise like that glass ring. It stopped when I focused on it, the way an itch hides when you want to scratch. Around 10 there was a knock. 3 firm raps, the kind you answer even when you don't want to. I looked through the peephole and saw a badge glint and a face I recognized from a framed article near the gift shop about local heroes. Deputy Salazar was a small woman in a bulky jacket with her hair in a tight braid. Her hands were bare in the cold. She had that solid look some people carry that tells you they're very tired and still very capable. "I got a call to check in," she said when I opened the door. "Earl said you saw something. I don't need to know what. We just like to keep people on a schedule." She said it dry like a joke, but her eyes drifted past me to where our gear lay on the bed. "You come back in the morning. Don't go back tonight." "Okay? Okay," I said. Mateo held up his hand. "Do you think frostbite looks like this?" She stepped in and angled his palm to the room light. "Looks like you grabbed a flagpole on a dare," she said. "You lose more than your pride when you do that. Keep it warm. If you can't feel it in an hour, go to the urgent care. I mean that." She left us with that and her card tucked under the room key on the table. I pretended to watch TV. Mateo pretended to sleep. At midnight, something tapped the window glass. Not hard, not repeated, just one polite knock. I didn't go look. Sometimes the right choice is surrender. We slept in shards that night and woke in a bowl of dry silence. Dawn made the cemetery plain again. Earl let us in without comment. He looked older in the morning, less like a watchman, and more like a man who had already lost a lot of arguments and learned to be graceful about it. We filmed until the light got thin. We said our thank yous and walked the rows one more time to say goodbye like we were leaving, a party early. At the gate, I touched the black mark on the post. It was rough like glazed clay. I tried to guess the height. 7.5 feet? 8? Too high for Earl even if he stood on his toes. There were faint edges at the fingertips like it had been pressed hard. We drove home that afternoon. The desert slid by. We didn't talk about the lantern because it felt childish to bring it up in daylight. Then near Benson, we both said, "Do you smell that?" at the same time. It was kerosene, and it hung in the car for 5 minutes and then left, like a passenger who realized they'd boarded the wrong bus. A week later, back in Phoenix, Mateo texted me a photo of his hand. The white ring had faded to a thin crescent. "Feels like I slept on it," he wrote. "Also, this is going to sound stupid, but my porch light won't shut off. Switch is off. Bulb is on dim. Any ideas?" I told him to check the wiring. I told him to buy a new fixture. I didn't tell him that 3 nights before I'd woken to the smell of kerosene so strong I went room to room looking for a leak. I live in an apartment. The only thing that runs is the fridge. I opened the freezer until the cold cut the smell. 2 weeks after that, the motor court clerk called me. It was a number I didn't expect to see. I answered and heard Kim say, "Earl passed yesterday. Heart." It was quiet. She said it flat, like she was telling me the weather. His nephew is taking over until they hire someone. He wanted me to tell the people who left their cards. I thanked her and felt that weird private grief you feel for people who don't know you, the grief that doesn't quite know where to go. That night I dreamed I was holding a lantern and it was empty and somehow heavy, the way grief is heavy, and when I woke up my bedroom had a weird color to it, a warmer tint, like sodium light from outside even though my block has LEDs. I rolled over and looked at the doorway. The space above the door was dark. The cheap paint on the wood has little bubbles you never notice until you're awake at 3. There was a patch that was darker than the dark. It was rounded and flared. I stared until my eyes watered. I got up and stood under it. I reached my hand as high as I could and couldn't touch it. I got a chair and still couldn't reach. I went back to bed and told myself it was a damp spot from who knows where. The building is old. Desert nights hum with strange heat. Your eyes lie. In the morning it was faint and not worth photographing. That's how I excused not photographing it. I made coffee and looked up flights and tried to be a person. Around noon my phone buzzed. It was a number with a county extension. Deputy Salazar's voice came through tinny. "Mr.?" She said my last name right, which impressed me. "Did you by chance leave a lantern at the cemetery?" "No," I said overly fast. "There's one inside the gate this morning. The glass is... it has a look." She paused. "We're taking steps to secure the site for now. I don't want you to worry. I only called because Earl liked you and I thought you'd want to know that he didn't leave a mess for anyone. He was like that. He didn't leave messes." "Is the handprint still there?" I asked. "It is," she said. Then, gently, like she was moving a glass on a table toward me. "There are 2 now. Smaller one. Lower down. I'm sure kids climbed the fence. We've had trouble with that. We'll sand it, that's all." We hung up with the appropriate condolences. I sat with my phone in my lap and watched a stripe of sunlight crawl across the carpet. When it reached the leg of my chair, a line of light shot up the wall, and for a second it looked like glass catching fire from the inside. I blinked, and it was only a reflection from a picture frame exactly where it always is, exactly as harmless. I've gotten good at explaining things to myself. Mateo's porch light did finally go out. He texted me a thumbs up and a photo of his hand with only a ghost of the crescent left. He also said his neighbor complained about a smell in the stairwell. "Like gasoline but sweeter," the text read. "Any idea what that is?" I typed a long explanation about solvents used by maintenance, then erased it and said, "Probably someone spilled lamp oil." He wrote, "Who uses lamp oil?" And I said, "Tombstone reenactors," and we laughed over text like cousins do. When something is actually not funny. A month passed. Work got busy. I recorded some scratch narration for Mateo's doc. We decided not to use anything from after sunset. We agreed without saying it that the daytime footage was prettier anyway. We put Earl in the credits because it felt right. I mailed the motor court a thank you note because I'm that kind of person and because doing polite things gives your hands a job when your head is chewing its own tail. I wish the story ended there. I wish I could say it was the power of suggestion and a caretaker with a knack for local color. But last Thursday, long after midnight, 3 knocks came on my door. Firm, polite, evenly spaced, exactly like the first night. I got up and looked through the peephole and saw no one and saw a late-night strip of hallway with the exit sign at the far end blinking slow. The knocks came again while I was looking. This time from up near the top edge of the door, not where a hand would hit, but where a tall man with a long reach might have tapped to be funny. I didn't open it. I stood there for a full minute, my forehead on the cold wood. When I finally stepped back, a smell came under the door like a neighbor had spilled a bottle in the hall. Kerosene is a simple smell. It finds you. I slept with the lamp on. When I woke, there was a smudge above the door the color of tea. A shape that could have been a trick of dust or any other harmless thing. I've decided not to measure it. I've decided not to sand it. This is the part where I tell you not to go to Boot Hill at night, like that will matter. If you do go, you'll probably get sunburned and buy a sticker and nothing else will happen. You'll smell dust and old flowers and the city fading out behind you. You'll see Earl's trailer and an old man you don't know sitting out front, who is not Earl at all, and you'll feel the smallness of your life against the size of the sky. And that will be the only haunting. But if someone offers you a lantern, if you catch the penny metal scent when there's no reason for it, if you hear that friendly glass ring in a place that should only make wind noises, set the lantern down. Do not touch the light. Walk away, slow the way you would walk away from a strange dog. talking low so it knows you're friendly and don't insult whatever it is by running. The glow is patient. It will find what it's looking for whether you help it or not. I didn't keep anything from Tombstone. No rocks, no receipts, no silly t-shirt. I've turned my porch light off every night this week and watched it out of the corner of my eye like it might change its mind. Sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth with the bathroom door open, I see warm light in the hall where there shouldn't be any, and I tell myself it's the thermostat display. I tell myself a lot of things because I like sleep and I like the shape of my life small and ordinary. If you've read this far, maybe you're like me and you want the same quiet. I hope you get it. I really do. But I can't stop thinking about that handprint at the gate and how it was too high for any living man to reach. My door is not as tall as that post, and I could still see the smudge when I stood on a chair. I have this picture in my head now that won't move. Not a man stretching up, not a prank, not a thing pressing down, but something being lifted. Like a person raised to the height of the mark, weightless for a second, hand against wood to steady itself. In my picture, there's no rope, no gallows, nothing at all to hold them. There's only the glow, and it's under the hand, and it's bright enough to show every line in the palm. When the picture comes, I smell kerosene. It goes away if I turn on every light in the apartment at once. I told myself I wouldn't write this. Then the knocks came again, and the third one made the lamp flicker. I'm posting this because telling is sometimes the only thing that lets you sleep. Tomorrow I'll paint over the smudge. I'll buy a new bulb. I'll tell myself that the 4 seconds I lost last night when the hallway went warm and gold were just a power surge and not a small portable piece of dawn hanging where my ceiling meets the wall. If you go to Boot Hill, be nice to the caretaker. Be nice to the deputy. Do not take souvenirs. When you leave, don't look back at the gate. If you absolutely have to, if you feel the pull like a hand at your sleeve, look down at your own hands instead. Count your fingers. If there are 5 and they're warm and they answer when you tell them to move, go home and call that luck. I'm going to bed now. The apartment smells fine. The lamp is steady. The hallway looks normal. If something taps, I'm not going to answer. If something glows, I'm not going to follow it. That's the plan. Plans are good. Plans make you brave. I'm going to set my phone face down and turn off the last light, and if the room doesn't stay dark, I'll turn it back on and pretend I meant to. I'll pretend the shape over my door was always there, and that Earl sanded the mark off the gate for good. I'll pretend the sun is all we have and all we'll ever need, and if a little piece of it wants me, I'll pretend I don't see it hovering by the ceiling, waiting to see if I'm the one who will finally hold it high enough to leave a mark. I'm going to tell this as plainly as I can, because that's the only way it makes sense in my head. This happened during the fall semester I spent at the University of Edinburgh. I was 21, living in a shared flat off Lauriston Place, with 2 other exchange students, Mina from London and Callum from Stirling. We were broke, always cold, and convinced that in a new city, you say yes to anything under a tenner that might turn into a story later. That's how Greyfriars started. You can't be in Edinburgh more than a week without someone pointing up the hill and saying, "You should see the kirkyard." It's right there, behind the school and the curved row of houses that look like a stage set. We walked through it for the first time on a Sunday afternoon, past the gates and the statue of the little dog everyone pats like it's a lucky charm. The stones lean into each other, layered with names and dates and lines from the Psalms. The place has that quiet you don't get in a park, a hush you feel behind your teeth. Even with people around, you notice breath on your own face like the air itself is waiting. It wasn't spooky in the way you expect, not at first. It was just heavy. Callum showed us where he took school photos once, back when you were allowed inside certain enclosed sections on tours. We followed a little lane that curled past vaults. The sky did that Edinburgh thing where it can't decide if it's bright or raining. It sprinkled, then cleared, then went still in a way that made me look up. And when it got still, the quiet felt different, like after someone hits pause on a recording and a paper-thin version of the room shows up underneath. I didn't hear anything that first afternoon, but Mina did. She stopped with her hand on one of those tilted stones and said, "Did you hear that?" We didn't. She shook it off. We got coffee on Candlemaker Row and fed a few chips to a gull that looked like it wanted a fight. 2 nights. Later, we went back on a cheap student ghost tour because of course we did. Our guide was a broad-shouldered guy in a black coat named Rob, the kind of person who can make reading a bus timetable sound like a legend. He joked about the poltergeist everyone whispers about, and he told us we'd probably feel cold spots because it's Scotland in October and there are holes in your jacket. A dozen of us clustered around him while he pointed out dates on stones and made a group of American tourists shriek by dropping his voice before he said grave. If I'm honest, the best part was the way the city looked from inside the walls. Lights strung like a necklace along the bridge, the wind tugging your hair, the sense that you're somewhere wrong and loved at the same time. We reached a line of stones that leaned toward a gap, 2 slabs with a narrow slice between them like a held breath. The wind had been nagging that whole walk, flanking us, then moving on. It died right there. I felt the absence of it on my cheeks first, then in my ears, like I'd stepped into a recording booth. Rob paused mid-story. You could hear people shift their feet on gravel. What I heard wasn't wind. If you've ever put your ear near a radiator and listened to the whistle when it's settling, it had that thinness to it, that wire brush scrape. It pushed through the gap between the 2 stones as if the space itself had a throat. And my first thought wasn't ghost or trick. It was that some kid had put a speaker behind the stones as a prank. I only got a syllable. Me. It was gone. Rob started talking again. You'll hear all sorts in here, brains like patterns. Just your brain ducking for cover. People laughed. I didn't. Mina had her arms crossed, pressing her sweater to herself like she was hiding a shiver. Later she told me she heard her father's name, whispered full and sure like the voice that used to call her from downstairs when dinner was ready. Callum said he heard his late granddad, just Cal, in a tone nobody else used. I got half of my own first name. I told myself it was suggestibility. You go into a place to be spooked, your brain obliges. It really would have stayed a cool memory if the quiet hadn't followed us home. Around 1 a.m. I woke up to a draft. The windows in those flats never sit right, and the radiators clank like an old bus. I pulled the duvet over my head and ended, up staring at the glow of my phone on the bedside table. Messages, 2 of them, one from Mina. Are you awake? One from an unknown number with no text, just a 4-second audio clip. My thumb hovered above it, then tapped. The clip was almost nothing. 4 seconds of what people call room tone, that flat hiss if you record in a silent room. But the flat hiss wasn't flat. If you've ever been in a dead-aired place after a loud bar and felt the echo of sound still working inside your skull, you know that ragged edge. Under that nearly lost a shape of Osh. If I say I knew it was trying to become Josh, you can write me off as primed. I replayed it until the tiny dynamic range of my phone gave up, and it turned into pure static. I texted Mina. She'd gotten one too. Hers was 7 seconds, and she deleted it before she could listen twice because hearing her dad's name when he wasn't there? Well, you don't need a complete story to see why she'd do that. Callum, in the next room, said he heard nothing and told us to grow up because he had a lab at 9. The next day, the city was washed clean by wind, the kind that makes the flag on the castle stand out like a statement. I told myself it would feel stupid if I didn't go back, like flinching from a joke. Mina insisted she wasn't going anywhere near it, then showed up at the door with a knit hat and a hot water bottle stuffed under her coat like a contraband pet. 15 minutes, she said. We stand in daytime and laugh at ourselves and go home. We went in by the side gate where the stone steps make your legs ache in some old hereditary way. A tourist map was peeking out of someone's pocket. A school group trailed a teacher who used the voice you use to keep small kids away from the edge of cliffs. We cut left and found the 2 tilted stones again. The wind, which had been sitting on my shoulders all morning, took a break. If you want a test to make sense of what happened, we tried one. We split and walked past at different distances, one at a time, then all together, then with our ears covered, then with eyes closed as if that would change anything. I heard my sister's name that time, not the shortened version she uses now, But the way my mom said it when she was little and refused to come out from behind the living room curtains, I felt the word on my molars like a tiny vibration. Not loud at all. Just precise. When we compared notes, Mina had heard her father again. Her voice went flat with it. "That's enough," she said. "It's a trick in a city that sells tricks. Let's get a scone and pretend we didn't buy in." We were halfway to the gate when a dog planted itself in our path. Medium-sized collie, perfect for Edinburgh, damp and smug. It wasn't threatening, it just wouldn't pass. The stones. You know how dogs lean back without looking like they're pulling? That stance. The owner tugged, sighing about silly animals, and then, this is a small thing but I think about it a lot, the dog's ears pricked toward the gap, and its mouth opened in a silent pant, and it planted its front paws wider like it was bracing. It wouldn't go until the owner gave up and circled the long way. It should have stopped there. Everyone I tell this to gets upset with me at this part. Because of course, I went back alone. The third time was a week later. A cold front had come through and the air had that smell like pennies and rain. Classes were stacked with deadlines. I needed something that wasn't my own head. I told Callum I was going to Tesco. I walked uphill instead. It was just after sundown when I stepped through the gate. You know how streetlights come on in patches, like parts of the city realize it's night before the others do? That was how the kirkyard looked. Pockets of light and then sections of real dark, not dangerous, just not interested in human eyes. I wasn't there for ghosts. I wanted to prove to myself that it was acoustics. Two stones at a particular angle, whistling when the air pressure dropped. Something simple and describable that I could put a name on and keep in a jar. I took my phone out and opened the voice memo app. I don't know much about audio, but I knew if I held it steady, I might catch something to play for myself later and hear how dumb it was. The memorial stones looked like teeth. I walked to the gap. The wind thinned, and I felt the absence of it on the hair on my arms, which didn't make sense because I was wearing a coat. That quiet turned up again, the kind that makes you conscious of blinking. "Okay," I said out loud, to no one. "Do your worst." Nothing came out of the stones at first. There was a prickling at the bridge of my nose as if a sneeze was coming. I told myself to breathe. The phone in my hand felt warm. A light swung somewhere in the distance. Someone's flashlight. Someone closing up. A voice called, "Gates in 5 minutes." It echoed wrong. The person sounded close and far at once, like they were talking from a stairwell. I stood for a full minute with the recording going, getting nothing but my own breath and the faint scuff of a shoe. Then the quiet turned, like it pulled a corner, of itself open. A shape of sound squeezed through the gap the way air squeezes under a door in a drafty house. It wasn't a word at first. It was a rubbing, like gloved fingers sliding on glass. I heard my last name. I don't say my last name online and I won't hear, but it was mine the way a stranger says it when they try to pronounce it in a doctor's office and you smile because at least they tried. I made this noise. Half laugh, half, "Oh, come on." And the space between the stones breathed again. It said the name I had as a kid. I didn't even realize I still had a deep box in my head that would respond to that version of me. Only my parents and one friend from home ever used it. When the whisper used that, the air around me changed temperature. Not cold or hot, just different, like stepping into shade. I put the phone closer to the gap. That was when the whisper said my sister's name again. And because I was an idiot, I tried to talk to it. "You're a stupid trick," I said. My voice sounded too loud. "What's the speaker in there? Battery, wires, I can wait." The thing in the gap didn't answer. It just worked at the edge of another word like a tongue finding a cracked tooth. The gates clanged, and a beam of a flashlight landed on the path near my feet. I turned, and the caretaker did a double take like he hadn't expected to find anyone still inside. I was ready to apologize, to explain the recording, to ask to be let out, when the whisper slid past the last syllable it had been grinding on and said my middle name. I don't use my middle name. I barely think about it. Hearing it spoken in that soft, wrong way cracked the floor under me more than if it had screamed. I must have gone white. The caretaker waved his light toward me. "You all right, pal?" I started. And then the whisper said Mina's father's name. I hadn't told it to anyone there. There was no way for some late-night trickster to know it. Out, the caretaker said, and I realized he was talking to me. It's closing. I'll walk you. We went toward the gate together. I kept my phone pointed behind me, like a person who points a camera at thunder might catch a lightning bolt. He noticed. Recording ghosts, are you? You'll just get yourself breathing. You won't like it when you listen back. Do you hear it? My voice came out wrong, too high, like I was pretending to be fine. He stopped walking. I stopped too. He had a face that would look kind, I think, in a supermarket, in daylight. Under a flashlight with the dark leaning over everything, his eyebrows made his eyes look smaller. Hear what? The names. I didn't say mine or my friends because suddenly that felt like handing keys to someone who didn't need them. He looked past my shoulder toward the patch where the stones leaned together. You know how people's faces change when they're remembering what they've decided to tell themselves? That look. If there's wind, he said, mind it. If there's no wind, mind it more. Don't stand in a place that's gone quiet. And don't answer if it knows you. That should have scared me more than the whispers. A grown man telling you to treat quiet like an animal you shouldn't turn your back on would normally do it. But I was more annoyed than scared, and that makes me hate the version of me from that night. I mumbled something like thanks and walked faster. Once I was at the gate, the city rushed in as if someone lifted a lid. A bus downshifted, a shout from Grass Market ricocheted up the slope, a set of footsteps hurried past on the pavement outside. The everyday sounds felt like a hand on my back, pushing me across the threshold. I replayed the memo as soon as I reached the lit bit of George IV Bridge. It was 4 minutes long. Wind, then no wind, then the little movements of me shifting my stance. And then there it was. My last name. My middle name, my sister's name. The name sat in the recording like stones on a riverbed, rounded and heavy and not going anywhere. I slept with a light on after that. I kept telling myself I'd delete the file and be done. I didn't. I kept it like a kid keeping a scab to pick to check whether it's healing or getting worse. The next day I sent the clip to Mina because I'm not always the friend I want to be. She didn't talk to me for a day. When she did, it was to ask me if it said her dad's name. I lied and said no. A week passed. I stopped waking up at 1 a.m. to phantom drafts. I stopped looking over my shoulder in the stairwell. I even answered a call from an unknown number because in another country, you forget which unknowns are dangerous. It was a delivery driver trying to find our building. He got it wrong anyway and left our groceries 2 streets over, and we chased after them laughing like normal students. Then the city went still, which sometimes happens before rain when the pressure drops and you can feel your ears pressure balance. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The sky crowded down tight. I was in the library, 4th floor, one of those long tables under brutal white light. People cleared their throats, shuffled notebooks, tried to make sounds humans make. That quiet stillness spread through the building like a lid. I looked up and met the eyes of a girl at the end of the table who seemed to feel the same shift. She cocked her head, the same head tilt as the collie, I realized later. I smiled like weird weather, then dropped my gaze to my laptop. Tuntiam. Notes app on my screen had an empty file open titled Essay. I blinked and looked back down, and in the bright nothing of the typing window a word appeared as if the cursor had hitched forward 3 spaces at once. Not one letter at a time. Not the way a prankster could type from across the room if they were somehow connected to my laptop. Just a word. Megan. My sister's name. The exact spelling our family uses, which is different from how most people spell it. I did the thing you do when you know you shouldn't make a scene and everything in you wants to scream. I closed the laptop. I stood up, took a breath, went to the bathroom. I ran water and watched my hands shake in a way that didn't match how I felt, which was strangely calm, like walking down a hall you've already walked in a dream. When I came back, the girl at the end of the table was packing her bag. She caught my eye and said, did you hear? She stopped herself. Never mind. Weird weather. The names didn't stop at my laptop. That night, Mina and I were making pasta in the tiny galley kitchen, reheating the same sauce. We had stretched through 3 dinners when a draft pushed the stove flame toward the wall and the room went still. Not quiet still. The sauce stopped bubbling for a second. We both noticed. We both froze. The pot made a sound like a sigh. And then, from the hall, from the space between the door and its frame, not the door itself, came a whispered name. I won't write it. It belongs to someone who isn't mine to use. But Mina grabbed the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles turned a non-human color and she said, "Don't say it back." I wasn't going to, I said. I wasn't. And also I was. Because the part of your brain that wants to look over the edge of a bridge just to see the height isn't always under your control. We ate our food sitting on our beds, doors open. Callum came home and said, "Why are you two being weird?" We told him we were watching a scary movie in our heads. He rolled his eyes, but he left his door open too. 3 open doors felt like a plan. We tried a rule. We made it up. If you heard a name, you didn't say it out loud afterward. You didn't tell each other the name unless it was an emergency. If something wrote a name on your screen, you erased it and didn't type it again. No repeating. No acknowledgements. The rule felt like throwing salt over your shoulder. It also felt like doing something, which sometimes is enough to keep you sane. For a few days, it worked. The city stayed noisy enough to drown out anything, thin and careful. Then Callum's phone rang at 3:10 a.m. He slept through it. Mina and I didn't because your body in a new place never really trusts sleep. A minute later, my phone rang too. Unknown number. I let it go. Then it rang again, and this time it was a contact. My mom. The time back home made that impossible. I answered fast, heart up in my throat. There was a tiny pause, the kind you get with bad connections. Then soft room noise. Then my full name, spoken like a roll call. I said, "Mom," and the call dropped. I called her back. She was asleep. I woke her. She told me the phone hadn't moved from her nightstand, and we spent the next 5 minutes saying it must have been a glitch, even though glitches don't usually whisper middle names. On Saturday, we decided to out-stubborn it. That's not the phrase we used. We dressed like we were going to the grocery store and walked to the kirkyard at noon, bright enough that the color drained back into everyone's faces. We brought paper and pens like idiot ghost hunters. "We'll write what we hear," Mina said, daring the place to behave like an experiment. "We'll see if it matches." We stood by the 2 stones, not quite close, not quite far, and waited. Families wandered. Tourists followed umbrellas. A tall guy in a scarf took pictures with an old-looking camera that made a satisfying click. A group of Korean tourists moved as a polite clump and smiled at everything. The dog statue down the street probably took 30 pictures on its own in the same hour if statues had counters. And then the air softened. You only know what that means if you've been somewhere that does it. It felt like someone lined a box with velvet and set it over us. There wasn't silence. There was less. The edges of sounds rounded off. The city leaned back. I put my phone on airplane mode and started a timer because it felt official. Mina stared at the gap. Callum pretended not to care and failed, which is still caring. The whisper that came through was steady, like someone practicing scales. It didn't say my name. It didn't say Mina's father. It said a name I knew from a freshman year news story. Someone from our high school who had died the year before I graduated. Someone I hadn't thought about in years. At the exact same moment, Mina scribbled on her paper. Callum frowned, not writing. We compared notes after a minute. Mina had written her boyfriend's name. Callum, nothing. It said mine, I told him. He shrugged. "Maybe it doesn't have your number," I said, trying to make it a joke. He didn't laugh. We stayed longer than we should have. The whispers tried names like keys in a lock. Some slid in wrong and you felt nothing. Some hit. You know when a word lands inside you and your body recognizes more than just vowels? That. I tried the rule I had, the salt over shoulder rule. I didn't say any of them back. I didn't write them again after the first minute. I took a photo of the two stones because I needed something normal to look at later and tell myself this was just a place with rocks and names of strangers. In the photo, later that night, the gap between the stones looked too dark, too neat, like someone had drawn it with a marker. I deleted the photo and then hated myself and then told myself I was allowed to want less of this. The last time, the worst time, began when I made another mistake and stayed after closing. I didn't mean to. I was up near the schoolyard side and a tour group clogged the path and the caretaker must have thought everyone had gone. And the gate swung and the sound it made was the most final metallic noise I've heard. Like a door, sealing on a plane. I shouted. He didn't hear. I checked the other exits. Locked. The city lights weren't far, but the feeling of being kept apart from them was huge. I could have phoned for help, but there was a part of me that thought, you wanted to solve this, here you go. I went to the two stones like I was going to a meeting I knew would go badly. I stood with my back to them because I didn't want to. Watch the gap in case watching mattered. The quiet slid over me without moving the air. That's the best I can do to describe it. It felt like dropping into a swimming pool and hanging just below the surface. I could hear the city, but filtered. A siren went by and sounded like a toy siren. The whisper spoke my last name, middle name, first name, in the wrong order. It said Mina's father's name. It said the name of the girl from the library, I swear it did. The one I'd only seen once and didn't know. The one who'd asked about the weather and had that collie tilt to her head. I nearly turned around to look to see if she was there, as if it were just a friend messing with me. Then the whisper said my full legal name, the one that exists on the passport you keep too deep in a drawer, and I moved. I turned because I couldn't not. There were no speakers, there were no wires. There were two slabs of carved stone leaning with a narrow, unremarkable gap that a mouse could use. And there was a feeling coming out of that gap like someone breathing steadily through a straw. Not a human breath. A breath that had worn the habit of names smooth from practice. A shape flicked through my peripheral vision. I thought it was. A person, a late tour, a caretaker come back. It wasn't. It was the absence of a person. I don't know how else to say it. You know how your brain edits out the blind spot, and you never notice it until someone does that stupid demo with the dot on paper. Imagine a tall person-shaped absence stepping where it wanted and your brain doing its best to paint it with the background and failing. I felt wet wind on one side of my face where there was no wind and smelled the iron smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. The whisper said, close enough to feel as much as hear. Look. I kept my eyes down. That was the only rule that came. To me that felt like it mattered. When you're at the beach and you know if you turn your back on the wave you'll get knocked over, you face it. This felt like the clockwork opposite of that. I decided if it wanted me to look, that was exactly what I wouldn't give it. Let me out, I said, my voice trembled. I'll go, I won't come back, I'll delete the file. There was no reply. There was a sense of something large deciding how much of me I was, like it could say my name enough times to rearrange me into something that fit into the gap. I took a step backward, keeping the stones at the edge of my vision. Another step. I hit my shin on a low wall and nearly swore. And then I did swear because feeling the real ache of a shin on stone yanked me back into my body. Pain is a beautiful anchor. I recommend it. I pulled my phone out and because I am either brave or dumb, I started playing the memo to drown out whatever the place had for me. It wasn't a great plan, but it gave me something to aim at. The tinny version of my own breath and the earlier whispers naming me like I'm a list. I walked toward the gate with that recording playing in my jacket pocket like armor. The caretaker appeared like a ship coming around a headland. Flashlight first, then body. What are you doing? He asked, and it was the exasperation of a man who has said closing time and had a boy choose to be an idiot. He let me out and didn't say more. Neither did I. We stood under the streetlight like people who had met at a bus stop and decided not to speak because the night had already said enough. I deleted the memo that night. I deleted the photos. I emptied the trash folder. I thought about throwing my phone into the canal and then remembered there are no canals there and also that I couldn't afford to replace it. I slept with the radio on quietly because human voices, even the dumb ones reading ads, made me feel tethered. Month later, When we were packing to leave the flat for winter break, I found a notebook under the couch when I was fishing for a lost fork. Spiral bound, cheap, the kind you buy in a 3-pack. The cover had water damage. The first pages were lecture notes in the loopy handwriting of someone who takes notes the way teachers tell you to take notes. About halfway through, the handwriting changed. It got tighter, then more frantic. The margins filled up. Names, dozens and dozens of names, some with dates next to them, some with little underlines, some scratched hard enough to tear the paper. I recognized two. One was the girl from the library, which made no sense, and one was a classmate from my freshman year I hadn't said out loud in years. There was a date next to hers that was wrong by 2 years, like the person writing didn't care about accuracy or time. I looked up and found Mina watching me at the door. She didn't ask, I didn't offer. I slid the notebook onto the pile for the charity shop and walked away. I had a dream the night before I flew home. In it, there was no wind on a high hill. The city curled around the base like a cat. The gap between two stones opened and opened, until it was a doorway, and the doorway was my front door back home. And instead of a doorknob, there was a piece of paper with my name typed neatly in the center in the font universities use on diplomas. I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth and the radio announcing the early morning weather. And I wanted to cry with relief because people were saying things that weren't my name. I don't have an ending. Not really. That's the part, I think, is going to frustrate anyone who wants a neat story box. I don't know what happens if you say your name back. I don't know what happens if you take chalk and write a new name on a stone and see if it learns it. I don't know who owned the notebook before it slid under our couch and filled its margins with the roll call of a place. I could tell you that now and then. When I'm in a quiet kitchen late at night and the fridge hum gums up the edges of sound, I hear the shape of a syllable in the space between the door and its frame. I don't say anything back. The rule is, the only gift I brought home from that city, don't answer if it knows you. We had a little group chat for Erasmus students that year. People kept it going for a while after we scattered. Folks shared photos of the castle in snow and the way the light looks flat and blue over the meadows in January. A month after I left, someone posted a link to a campus forum thread about a diary found in a dorm room during end-of-term cleaning. The photo on the thread showed an open page and margins full of names written in tight, trembling lines. The last entry on the last page ended mid-sentence, smudged as if the writer had brushed a sleeve over wet ink. The comments were full of jokes and a few serious people telling others to show some respect. The thread disappeared a week later. Sometimes when I get an unknown number call, I let it ring out. If there's a voicemail, I don't listen. Not because I think a whisper will say my name again. I don't need the proof I already have. But because I've started to think, the names aren't for the person who hears them. Maybe they're for the place, maybe the place is practicing, maybe it says what it thinks belongs where it is. A few weeks back, my sister texted me a photo of our front porch with a wet envelope on the mat. "Someone left this," she wrote. It had no stamp. My name and hers were typed on labels. Inside was a blank sheet of paper. At least, we both said blank. Later, when I looked at it under good light, there was the faintest impression of letters, like someone had written on the paper on top of it and the pressure pressed through. If I hold it at an angle, if I squint, if I pretend I don't know how to read, I can make out 2 or 3 of the same few letters repeating in a way that makes my skin crawl. I put it in a drawer with the things you don't throw away and don't display: old keys, expired IDs, the watch that belonged to someone who never learned to tell time because it wasn't about the watch. I don't take it out, I don't look at it, that's the rule. I'm telling this because everyone loves to think they're immune to tourist stories, that legends bounce off you if you roll your eyes at the right angle. I rolled my eyes. It didn't help. If you go to Greyfriars, pat the little dog's nose if you want. Look at the stones. Read the names of strangers. Take your photos. If the day goes still and the gap between 2 tilted stones looks too neat, keep walking. And if, when you're lying in bed months later on another continent with the radio on, a thin whisper slides under the door and tries a version of your name you haven't used since you were 6, don't answer, even if it gets it right. Especially then. I was 24 the summer the ground opened at Oakwood. If you've never lived through a Texas August, think of a hairdryer pointed straight at your face from sunrise to way past midnight. Our town sat between a feed mill and a slow river that was more sandbar than water by then. Oakwood Cemetery was on a slight rise behind a row of shotgun houses with thin porches and boxed-in crawl spaces, the kind of houses where you hang a swing from eye bolts and hope the studs don't split. The dirt in the cemetery was a hard mix of clay and chalk, caliche, that fractures when the heat drags on too long. The cracks start like pencil lines, then widen to something you could lose your keys in. By August, every path was a jigsaw. I worked there because Mr. Green, the groundskeeper, needed knees younger than his. He was in his late 60s, a patient man with a straw hat and a thermos of sweet tea he never emptied, just refilled. My job was trimming the edging around stones and sweeping off the flat markers after the dust storms. You'd be amazed at how quiet a place full of names can be. You can hear everything: train horns from a mile off, neighborhood dogs arguing, the little ticks of grasshoppers ricocheting off the stone. That summer, I also heard about the hand. The boy's name was Luke. He cut through the cemetery most days to get to his friend's place on the far side. It saved him 10 minutes, and his mom could see the gate from their porch. It was one of those paths that aren't really paths until enough people use them. Just a thin line of tamped grass weaving through the older section where the stones lean. He told it the same way every time while trying to act like it hadn't. Scared him. He said the earth had a crack like a busted biscuit, and when he looked down, a pale hand poked up through the gap. He said it didn't grab, didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was just there, palm up, fingers dusty, like someone waiting to be helped up. He ran. If it had been just a kid's story, I think it would have stayed a neighborhood joke, but his dad grabbed a flashlight and a spade after dark, marched into Oakwood, and dug. I came in early the next morning because Mr. Green's call had a tone to it. He spoke quiet, like church. "We got a situation at Caldwell's," he said, which meant the older section by the big live oak. The grave, Luke pointed out, had been opened in a ragged oval 2 feet wide. There was fresh dirt beside it and the half-moon shapes of a spade pressed into the pile. You could smell cool earth, the kind that stays damp under the top crust even in August. Down a little deeper, cedar slats showed at angles like ribs. One slat was split, and through the split, I could see the coffin's interior lining, shredded fabric clinging to splinters. The lid had been broken from the inside. The space beyond was dark and empty. Sheriff's deputies showed up, then left, because there wasn't much to charge anybody with besides trespass and bad judgment. Mr. Green cussed under his breath while we started putting the soil back, and every shovel made a hollow sound as it hit air pockets. He kept saying the same thing. That box should have been solid. I asked if it was possible the cemetery had exhumed someone long ago and just left the coffin. "We keep records," he said. He brought me to the tiny office where the AC groaned like a tired man and pulled out the big ledger, the one that never left that desk. Annie Mae Caldwell, died 1901. Age, 5 months. Plot 14B. A note from 1974 said, "Reinterred to family lot per request. Infant remains minimal. Coffin compromised during removal." In pencil, different handwriting, there was another note I'd never noticed before. Box returned to Phil. No initials. Luke's dad, Javier, didn't apologize to Mr. Green. He stood on his porch across the chain-link fence that backed up to Oakwood and said he dug because his son couldn't sleep. He saw something, he said, jaw tight. I needed to show him there was nothing there. His wife, Emma, kept a hand on Luke's shoulder. The porch swing next to them hung still. It had that lazy sway every swing has, the little drift. That tells you the air is moving even when it feels dead. They said the swing had been creaking at exactly 12 every night since the hand. You'd be asleep and it would start up. Pause, like a long breath that kept time. The crazy part was nobody sat in it. They'd look through the screen and the seat would be dragging rhythm against the hooks. Emma said she got up and held it still with both hands one night, and the sound kept going for 2 more minutes. A ghost of a creak you could feel in your teeth more than you could hear. She was embarrassed saying it. "We aren't those people," she said, meaning the kind who make trouble. "We just want to sleep." I told them the soil shifts, that air pockets settle and boards move. It's not a lie. In heat like that, wood dries to a tighter grain. Chains sing when a truck passes. Shrinkage and sound. But that same day, I went back to the grave with Mr. Green and noticed something that didn't fit any of the easy answers. 5 parallel furrows marred the fresh dirt we'd tamped. They were shallow, not even 1/8 of an inch deep, and straight as comb marks, running from the broken coffin slat toward the path. They stopped before the edge like whatever made them lifted. Raccoon? Maybe. An animal would leave prints, though. These were just lines, tight together, evenly spaced. When you spend your days among stones, you start paying attention to small things. I found a blue glass marble half buried near the Caldwell grave, still shiny where the dirt hadn't dulled. It was the kind with a suspended swirl inside, the kind I used to trade in grade school. It looked new because glass doesn't age like we do, but the dirt packed around it was solid, like it had been there a long time. I wiped it clean with my shirt and put it on the ledger shelf next to the stapler. Mr. Green saw me do it and frowned, like I'd broken a rule I didn't know. He didn't say anything. That night the swing creaked. I heard it from the office of all places because the window was open to catch whatever air the AC wasn't providing. The sound carried over the chain-link fence and through the heat like a metronome. Pause, e. I walked out with a flashlight and crossed the lane. A neighbor 2 houses down sat smoking, eyes on the swing. "Started at 12:03, he said. "It's that exact, like the news." I reached for the swing and wrapped my hand around the chain. The steel links vibrated against my palm, a faint, steady hum like a refrigerator. When I let go, the sound stayed. I crouched and looked beneath the seat. The porch boards had a thin film of dust worked into an arc just under where the seat would sweep. I could see a spot rubbed shinier than the rest, like something had been grazing that same place night after night, wearing the dust into a track. We tried normal explanations. Javier tied the swing down with picture wire. At midnight, the wire sang like a plucked string and the sound came anyway, the same patient rhythm. We put a cheap trail camera on the porch pointing at the swing. The card filled with black frames triggered by nothing anyone could see. In one shot, a faint smudge sat on the seat slat, a whiter smudge in the shape of a palm. It could have been nothing. It looked exactly like what your brain makes out of noise when it really wants to see a face in the clouds. Back in the office, the ledger got my attention again. I don't know why I looked when I did. Habit, maybe. The marble I'd sat there was gone. In its place was a thin piece of cedar the size of a bookmark. It had 2 old square nails through it, hammered from the wrong side as if whatever built it didn't plan on those nails being visible. The wood smelled like closets and the sweet tang of old chests. Along one edge, 5 short scratches ran parallel, close together. They weren't neat. They crossed each other at little angles like someone had dragged tiny nails across it in a hurry, over and over, trying to get purchase. I went to Mr. Green with the cedar strip in my hand. He didn't touch it. He told me something I hadn't wanted to consider. "People think cemeteries are still," he said, "but they move. Not the stones, the ground. We backfill, we tamp, we water. Air finds a way even in clay. It travels under like a thought. It moves from low to high, from cool to warm. I don't know why that seems important right now, but it does." Then he told me about the note in pencil. Box returned to Phil, and the family request from 1974. "They couldn't pay," he said softly. "We did what we could. Sometimes the box goes back without much in it. The ground is a stingy keeper. You think you took everything, it keeps a piece." Saturday night, Emma asked me to sit on their porch with them because Javier was ready to sleep through it and see if it stopped. She brought out a fan that did nothing but push warm air around and a pitcher of water that tasted like the hose. Luke sat cross-legged with his back to the wall like the swing was a movie he wasn't sure he wanted to watch. The neighborhood had that strange late-night feel where the daytime noise had all turned in, and everything left was far away. The Whataburger sign on the highway pulsed orange through the trees like an eye opening and closing. Somewhere, a radio played a slow song in Spanish. The cricket's pulse had a soft engine sound under it. Around 11:58, a wind that wasn't a wind moved across the porch. It was like cold air slithering out from under a door. The hairs on my forearms lifted. At 12:03, the swing began. I held the chain. It shivered like something alive. Javier had left the wire in place, twisted tight around the right-hand arm. The wire creaked with the motion, even though the seat didn't move more than a fraction of an inch. I could feel vibration in the wood of the seat as if weight settled and then eased off. The smell came then. Not rot, not anything nasty. Clean soil. The smell you get when you break open a bag of potting mix. It came in a pulse with the creak. Emma's eyes were shining like she was holding tears by the edges. "She keeps making that sound," she whispered. And I didn't ask her who she meant because sometimes our mouths choose a person before our brains do. When it stopped, the night felt empty like after a train passes. We kept listening for something that wasn't there. That's when the scratch started under the porch. I didn't hear it at first. Luke did. His head snapped to the floorboards, then to the lattice that blocked off the crawl space. It was a thin scrape, the kind a stick makes when you drag it across dry dirt. It moved slowly like a slug traveling. I got on my stomach and peered through the lattice diamonds with my flashlight. The space under their porch was a foot high in the front, tapering to nothing at the back where the ground rose. The dirt was cracked in a map of lines that ran toward the house, then split into smaller lines and smaller again, like a river losing itself into marsh. In the beam, something pale drew a curved track across one of those lines. It could have been a root. It could have been a pale grub. It could have been my eyes. The track ended under the swing. The smell of dirt grew stronger and then it was gone. The next morning, Oakwood had a new scar. The Caldwell grave we had filled was slumped again, not as much as before, but enough to show a lip where our tamping had been. At the edge of that lip, 5 shallow lines pointed toward the fence. They weren't deep enough to cast a shadow, but I could see them when I crouched and held my phone sideways along the ground to catch the angle. When I pressed my own fingers in beside them, my hand was bigger. The lines were closer together than mine. I couldn't make my hand do what those lines did without feeling like I was forcing it to be smaller. We set a live trap at Oakwood that night in case an armadillo had moved in. The trap gate was up in the morning and the bait was gone, but the cage was empty. The bait was a can of sardines and oil. The can lay licked clean outside the cage, oil making a dark stain in the dust. There were no prints. The metal floor of the cage had a chalky hand-shaped patch where the dust that had settled on it had been wiped in 5 sweeps. I went to the county records office because the ledger was now less of a ledger and more of a nerve. Ms. Del Rio, who had worked there as long as any cabinet in that building, rolled her chair on squeaky casters over to the microfilm reader and showed me the 1974 entries for Caldwell. It was all in Dry County language. The key parts said, "Box broken upon lift," and "partial remains recovered, measured under 3 ounces," and "family declined additional service." It said the box, being cedar, was returned to ground as fill under groundskeeper direction. It said nothing about what happened to what they didn't find. That afternoon, the heat broke. Heat lightning flickered to the north without thunder, and a wind ran down our street like something chased. I was in the office staring at the cedar strip when I heard 3 quick knocks on the wall behind me. It wasn't the door, I checked. It wasn't someone carrying a ladder against the wood, it was inside the wall. The knocks traveled, 3 quick ticks, then 3 more, then 3 in a row, moving from behind the file cabinet to under the window to the floor by my foot. If you've heard termites, this wasn't that. It sounded like tapping from the other side. I froze with my hand on the desk and waited. When it stopped, I stood and saw my fingers had pressed the cedar strip, hard enough to make tiny half-moons in the skin. I didn't tell Mr. Green about the tapping because it felt like admitting something you can't take back. Instead, I told him I wanted to try watering the Caldwell grave to settle the air voids. "The city's got restrictions," he said, and I said I'd bring a hose from my place and do it at night. He looked at me a long time and said, "If you're going to do it, Do it before midnight. I ran the hose low so the water wouldn't cut channels and walked it around in a slow circle. The heat soaked it up before it reached my ankles. The ground hissed, and I could smell that fresh dirt smell again, stronger this time, like the earth was breathing out. When I stopped, a thin ribbon of wetness had threaded the crack nearest the grave marker and was crawling away like a snake's track through the fence line toward Javier's porch. At 11:50, I was back at the house with the porch. The swing wasn't hung. Javier had taken it down and leaned it in the shed after the wire trick did nothing. He had dusted the hooks with chalk to see if anything touched them. Emma had salted the threshold because her aunt said salt kept bad things out. Luke was asleep at a friend's house because bad dreams jump, Emma said, and she didn't want them jumping onto him. We sat with the door open because the air finally felt like it might let us breathe. The smell of dirt came in at 12:01, not 3. It was sudden and cool and not unpleasant. The chalk on the hooks shivered. We heard the shed door latch click open, though I'd watched Javier slide the bolt. He looked at me, stood, and crossed the porch in 3 steps. The shed door swung back with that hollow echo of plywood. The swing hung from the rafters on a pair of nylon straps, and it was moving just a little. The kind of motion that makes you second guess whether you're looking at it right. It wasn't hanging by chains. It shouldn't have made any noise, but from the porch behind me the creak started. Not loud, not angry, just the same slow breath sound, the sound of wood rubbing steel in rhythm. I turned. The hooks were empty. The sound came from the spot where the swing would have been. Under, Emma whispered. She was already on her knees at the lattice, pulling the corner up where a nail had loosened. I lay down beside her and shined my light. The beam cut across the dirt and froze on a seam I hadn't seen before. It was thin as a paper cut and ran straight under where the swing would hang if it were still there. The seam widened while I looked at it, very slowly, like a lip forming words. From it, cold air slipped out. The smell of cedar came with it, edged with something faint and sweet, like the inside of an antique dresser where somebody kept old linens. The dirt made a sound like sifting. In that narrow wedge of space, something pale sat for just a second. It looked like the pads of fingers bracing. I reached without thinking and touched it. It collapsed to powder against my skin. A root, or fungus, or the dried cast of something that used to be wet. The powder on my fingertips felt the same as the dust on the ledger pages. Behind me, something tapped 3 times against the porch floor, right where my chest had been before I rolled to look. The sound was small and polite, like a knock where you expect a please. The seam closed the smallest fraction. The dirt settled. The smell faded. We were left with ordinary night sounds. A car on the state highway. A dog changing positions and groaning about it. The fan on the porch ticking when its blade hit the warped part of its cage. The next morning, the Caldwell grave was level. I don't know what I expected. I think I wanted it to be worse so I could point at it and say, "See? Mr. Green met me there with the city guy and a load of sod. Let's finish this right," he said. We tamped the soil in lifts and watered between each lift and fitted the sod tight like a haircut done by someone who cares. We set a small marker with Annie Mae Caldwell in letters we had to order, because no one had paid for one a century ago. We did what we knew how to do. 2 nights passed without the creak. Emma cried from relief and embarrassment both, like she'd been holding her breath for a week and was mad at herself for being the kind of person who holds her breath over a sound. Javier slept through both nights for the first time in days. On the 3rd night, at 12:03, the creak returned. It was softer now, farther away somehow, like the sound was coming from behind a door just cracked. I left town the week after Labor Day because summer's work ends when the grass slows down. Mr. Green gave me the cedar strip without saying, "Why?" "You keep it," he said, and I felt like he was handing me a story I hadn't finished reading. I checked my phone from time to time because the habit of listening doesn't go away when you quit a job. On the 2nd Friday of September, Emma texted a picture around 11:30. It was nothing dramatic. It was the porch steps with a crescent-shaped smear of dusty gray near the bottom, the shape you'd get if a small hand slid down the riser. and left the outline of its fingers in the dirt. 10 minutes later, she sent another picture of the inside of the shed. The swing sat in the same place, still. On the concrete under it, 5 thin lines ran toward the door and stopped. They moved the following month. You'd think that would be the end of it. The new family painted the porch and replaced the hooks with bigger ones. The first Friday they slept there, the neighbor down the street, the smoker, told me the swing creaked for 8 minutes even though there was no swing to creak. When I drove past Oakwood that night, I parked on the lane by the Caldwell marker and sat on the bench we'd bolted under the live oak. Someone had left a little silk flower tucked into the grass by the stone. It wasn't pretty, but I liked that it was there. The heat had broken for real by then. The air had the first edge of fall. I waited without really admitting I was waiting. At 12:03, a cool stream slid around my ankle like water poured out. The bench boards flexed almost imperceptibly beside my thigh. Something tapped the leg of the bench 3 times. When I stood, 5 hairline cracks ran from the dirt under the bench across the path and into the parched grass like finger lines drawn with a pencil, too soft to make more than a whisper. I followed them to the fence. On the other side, on the inside of the chain link, dust had collected in contact points that matched the height of the bottom slat of a porch swing. If you need the part where I tell you exactly what it was, I don't have it. I have the ledger, the note in pencil, the microfilm that says a box broke 50 years ago, the cedar strip with scratches so small they fit inside the crescent moons my own nails leave when I'm anxious. I have a kid who saw a hand in a porch that made a noise nobody loves. I have the smell of clean soil arriving like a person at a door and leaving the same way when no one invites them in. I moved a couple hours away that fall and rented the top half of a duplex with a balcony that overlooked more parking lot than view. It had a metal chair that you could pretend was a swing if you wanted to, but it wasn't one. The first week I brought the cedar strip because it felt wrong to leave it. I put it in a drawer because I didn't want to look at it. The day after I did, my upstairs balcony chair made a sound at 12:03. Not the Oakwood sound, not wood on steel. Just a soft click of one bolt settling and then a second soft click, the kind that doesn't mean anything until it does. I got up, opened the balcony door, and stood with my hand on the cool railing. The street was empty, the air barely moving. When I went back inside, there was a faint curve of dust on the welcome mat where I hadn't remembered dust being. 5 lines ran across it like a child had dragged their hand through flour. I wiped it with my foot and told myself a story about wind. Months later in January, when the air was thin and mean and you could actually see your breath in the mornings, Mr. Green called me. "Just checking," he said, like old men do when they mean more. He told me he'd been out to Oakwood late because someone had left a candle by their mama's stone, and those have to be watched when the grass is dry. "You remember those knocks?" he asked afterward. 3 and 3 and 3? I said I did. "I've been hearing them in the office," he said. I answered once. He laughed like he knew he shouldn't have. I said, "I hear you." Then I went and sat by Caldwell's stone until I didn't feel stupid. I asked him if it stopped. "Not exactly," he said. "It's softer now, like it's farther in, or deeper. Here's what I think, if my thinking matters. In July, the ground dries to glass. In August, it breaks. The air finds what little space is left and goes where it can. If there's a fragile thing in that space, a cedar box, a piece of cloth, a name somebody forgot to put on a stone, the air moves past it and makes a sound. Sometimes you hear the sound where it doesn't belong. If a child gets scared because he saw a hand that could have been anything sticking out of the crack in a place that should not have hands, and his dad tries to convince him the world is normal by digging, and the ground answers in the only way it knows how, making the same motion at the same time every night, maybe it isn't trying to scare anybody. Maybe it's what any forgotten thing would do if it found a way to be noticed for a minute. I still have the cedar strip. Some nights, usually Friday, I open the drawer and hold it between my palms. The scratches are old, and they catch the skin on the side of my index finger. If I slide wrong and that little sting brings the smell back, potting soil, cedar chest, the cool draft that doesn't fit with the heat. I don't keep it out because it feels like leaving a door open. I don't throw it away because it feels like shutting something out that doesn't deserve to be stuck forever. On a handful of nights when the wind drops to nothing and the neighbors finally turn off their music, I hear a porch swing somewhere far off past the parking lot and the dark road and the line of hackberry trees that eat cars' paint, creaking in a steady breath. It's not close, it's not mine. It's regular and patient, like someone waiting and not wanting to be rude about it. I close the drawer then, and lock it without meaning to, and I go to bed with the window cracked because I like the night air. People send me messages sometimes because somehow I've become the person you tell about sounds. They say their old parents' porch started creaking after the funeral. They say their dog stares at the floorboards and wags once like greeting someone, then lies down where there's no one to scratch him. They say their kid won't cut across the cemetery anymore, and they don't push it, and the long way adds 10 minutes to everything. I tell them all the same thing. Water the ground when it's dry, keep your ledger straight, hang a name where it should have been hung. If a sound comes at 12:03, sit with it and listen until it goes, and try not to yell at what you can't. See? If you feel a draft and smell clean earth, don't be afraid. That's only the ground reminding us it moves even when we call it still. If there's a hand in it, open yours and wait. People in Lawrence and Topeka trade stories about Stull like baseball cards. If you grow up within 20 miles of it, sooner or later someone will ask, "Have you been?" They expect a grin and a shrug, the kind of answer you give about sneaking into a pool after hours. I used to treat it the same way. I thought I was just going to collect a goofy memory and a grainy video for my friends. I'm writing this because I still wake up sometimes to a knocking sound I can't unhear. And every time a storm rolls in across the fields, I move through my house turning on lights like that could hold something outside that has never needed a door. Back then I was a senior. It was early spring, that in-between stretch when Kansas can't decide whether it wants to freeze you or boil you. My friends were Jenna, my cousin, Malik, who always laughed first and worried second, and Tyler, who worked at a farm co-op and had a truck big enough to make him sit taller than his mistakes. You pick friends for simple reasons in high school, who shares your lunch, who can drive, and those reasons feel like destiny. We had been telling each other Stull stories since sophomore year, and every time we drove past the turnoff and saw the pale gravel ribbon through the trees, the Dare hung in the cab of the truck like a heavy coat none of us wanted to try on. The Dare was always the same. Knock 3 times on the mausoleum door. Most nights, according to the legend, nothing happened. But if it did, if the door knocked back, you ran and didn't turn around. The part that always got me was the description of the knock. How people said it sounded hollow, like hitting a big empty drum with your hand. I don't know why that detail felt more real than the stuff about devils and portals. Maybe because I'd actually heard that sound before. The way thunder shakes old barn siding. You can tell yourself a lot of smart things about legends, but you can't fake the way a noise crawls across your skin. We picked a night when the weather report kept repeating the phrase, isolated storms. It felt like cheating. Like we were stacking the deck to make the place seem more dramatic, more special. We met at the Casey's on Clinton Parkway. Jenna came with a backpack and 2 small flashlights, one of which already flickered when she turned it on. Tyler bought a bag of beef jerky and something called Monster Loco Mango because he thought it sounded like a good omen. Malik brought his little handheld camcorder, the one that had survived tailgates and one drop off Tyler's tailgate. He said we'd be YouTube famous for like a day. I laughed to show I wasn't thinking about anything deeper than that. The girl working the register looked about our age. When Tyler put the jerky down, she nodded like we all knew the script. "Don't go out there," she said. "The deputy's making laps tonight. He'll write you up." Tyler smiled the way guys smile when they've already decided what they're going to do. "We're just going for a drive." "You do you," she said, and handed him his change. "Just, if you hear 3 knocks, don't knock back." In the truck, nobody wanted to ask if that had sounded rehearsed. Wheat fields slid past. The kind of deep, dark flat that makes the sky feel bigger, not the other way around. You can see weather from miles off in Kansas, like a moving city. Out there, a cluster of low clouds stacked on each other like plates. Lightning licked along the bottoms, silent because of the distance. Malik had the camcorder on his knee. He Kept checking the battery icon like it could vanish if he looked away. We parked at the end of the lane so the truck wouldn't show from the road, the way people always did in the stories. From there, the chain link fence was just a darker rectangle against the pale ditch grass. No trespassing signs hung at crooked angles. I remember the way the wind changed when we stepped out of the truck, how it went from the steady rural hum you get near fields to a stop-start push, like someone was standing a few yards away and breathing in our direction. Last exit for sanity, Jenna said, like a flight attendant. After this, we have to pretend whatever happens was totally worth it. We climbed the fence near a sagging post, the metal cold and gritty under my hands. On the other side, the ground tilted up. Headstones came into view at different heights, some upright, some slumped like tired shoulders. I always thought cemeteries looked neat in daylight, like old little towns of names and dates. In the dark, they just look like a picture missing important details. Hollows where bushes should be, low shapes your eyes keep trying to label. The thunder was closer now. You could see light without sound and count. 1, 2, 3. Before, the rumble caught up. The mausoleum sat on the far side, a squat stone shed with a heavy iron door. Someone had welded bars across it at some point. Thick flat bars in an X and a cross like belt straps on a chest. Even from 20 yards away, I could see where kids had chalked names and random insults on the stones. The chalk looked softer than it should, smudged by damp and time. The air smelled like wet limestone and old leaves. I could taste dust. We made a circle by the door. Jenna handed me one flashlight and took the other. Tyler clicked his phone to the audio recorder because the camcorder mic never worked right in wind. Malik rested his palm on the iron crossbar like he was saying hi to a dog. We are the kind of people who talk too much to keep from thinking, but nobody wanted to fill the silence now. It felt like drawing lines in the wrong place. "Ready?" Tyler said. He had a round river rock in his hand, like he'd been prepared for this moment for years and kept it in his pocket like a secret. "You knock," Jenna said. "You wanted this the most." "On 3, Malik said, like we needed rules. He lifted the camcorder. 1. He didn't get to 2. Somewhere inside the little building, something shifted with a soft metal sound. Almost nothing, the way a wire sings when you flick it. It was so quiet, I'm still not sure we all heard the same thing. But I saw it travel across their faces first. The way their eyes cut to the side. The way Tyler's shoulders went from cocky wide to middle school narrow. He forced a grin. "Stop," he said. "Dude, stop, it's a building, they creak." "You always talk like you're narrating," Jenna said. Relief slipped into her voice. "Just do it." Tyler knocked 3 times. Not hard, not like he wanted to dent anything. 3 firm taps with the rock on the iron strap. The sound went into the stone and came out of it in a way I can't explain. It was like nothing echoed until it reached the corners of the cemetery, and then it all came back at once, a hollow tone, a big slow drum, mallet on barrel. You could feel it pass through your shirt. "Okay," Malik said, voice too loud because silence is a dare. "We did it. The first knockback sounded like a mistake, like something falling. I almost decided it had come from the trees. It didn't try to sound impressive, it didn't sound like a threat, it sounded like someone on the other side had gotten startled and smacked their hand against a wall because their balance went wrong. We froze so hard it felt like everything else in the world stopped out of politeness. I stared at the door. Nothing moved. No one breathed. Thunder took its time. Then it happened again, a little heavier. You know that feeling when bass hits a car door just right and makes your sleeve flutter? Imagine that, but colder. The third knock came with a grin of metal, from the strap nearest Malik's hand, and a tiny little ping like when something inside a pipe slips into a new slot. A flinch ran through our group like electricity. It wasn't the noise. It was the feeling. Something about the timing, the weight. It wasn't like an animal testing a pan or a branch hitting iron. It was the way you knock when you're saying, "Well, your turn." "Okay," Jenna whispered, the word breaking in the middle like it had sprouted a crack. She took a step back and her boot skidded in the wet grass. "We did it. It did it," That's it. Tyler lifted the rock again, just a little, like his arm forgot the conversation. I grabbed his wrist because I didn't want to find out what happens when you reply to something that's already answering you. I felt the fine hair on his forearm stand up against my palm. He pulled free, not angry, just automatic. Don't. Malik said. Do not. That was enough. We have proof. He tapped the camcorder like it was a talisman. We got the sound. The wind stirred and died on our faces in a way that made me think of a big animal breathing from a hole. Not heat, not breath. Just pressure moving. The grass by our ankles leaned and flattened, not in the same direction as the wind. Jenna raised her light and the beam found a gray patch on the iron. At first it looked like shadow. Then it looked like the iron had a bruise. No, Tyler said, smiling the way you smile when you say you're fine after you step off a curb you didn't see. No. He raised the rock again like a reflex. Before he could bring it down, the door pushed outward in a way that made my stomach stumble. You don't think of iron as flexible, and I wouldn't have called what I saw flexing. It was more like a slow muscle under a sheet. Cold movement. The center rounded forward less than a finger's width, and all the welds made small noises, like cutlery sliding in a drawer. The sound came a beat later. 3 knocks. Heavier, faster, like somebody inside decided to show us how it was supposed to be done. Not the volume, I've heard car doors slam louder, but the weight, the way the ground gave a little under my shoes. Everyone ran. Nobody said run. Nobody counted. It was like the part of your brain that tells your legs what to do had its own private doorway. Jenna veered left and caught her hip on a stone. Malik swung the camcorder around by its strap and almost clocked me. Tyler sprinted first, then his foot went into a low place and he pitched forward, catching himself with both hands. He shouted a word that got lost in wind and thunder and his voice. He looked back because people in stories look back, or maybe because he was hurting and wanted to blame a shape. He told me later he saw the door bulge again, bigger. He said it looked like something pressing its forehead to cold glass from the other side, that particular curve of skull and brow ridge and the shallow slope down to a nose. I want to say that's his description, not mine. I want to say I didn't see it, but I remember a shape and I remember how the light made a shadow with edges that didn't match the bars. I remember a stale smell, like old concrete that's been wet a long time, but warmer too, like someone's breath in your hands on a winter day. We got to the fence and everything about it felt wrong. The sagging post was stiffer. The gap felt narrower. Panic makes you bad at simple tasks, and there is nothing simpler than getting your legs over a thing and onto the other side. We fumbled it like a joke. Tyler helped Malik, then Jenna, then me, and by the time my shoes hit the ditch I could hear the fence links shaking, not in a line, not from our hands. In groups of 3, a chattering clink, like someone was moving down the fence, tapping each square with a knuckle. I don't know how else to say it. We ran. Tyler fumbled his keys and swore, and got them, and shoved them into the ignition, and the engine coughed in that winter morning way, even though the air was warm. When the headlights lit the interior of the truck, I noticed 3 dime-sized circles of mud on the inside of the windshield right above the dash, and I didn't say anything because there wasn't room inside me for the words. Nobody talked the first mile. We hit the road and the gravel changed under the tires to the smoother hum of the county line, and only then did anyone say anything, and it was Jenna. "It's going to follow us," she said. It wasn't one of those statements where you ask for reassurance. She said it the way you say the sky is dark. A report. Malik checked the camcorder. The battery icon was a fat rectangle, full, like it had been when we started. He hit play and we heard ourselves breathing and moving and whispering, and we heard Tyler count, and we heard the rock hit iron 3 times, clean, bright. When the knock came back, the audio clip went a flat hiss, a little burst of static like wind in leaves, except there wasn't wind in leaves. It was just us, and the hiss, and then a scrape noise, like someone sliding a chair across tile from 3 rooms away. Then our footsteps too fast and too loud. "That's not funny," Tyler said. "Why would I Malik started, and then there was a knock somewhere to my left. Not loud, Not dramatic. A finger on a door. We all shut up at the same time, and Tyler flicked his eyes at the passenger door like it had become part of a new math problem. Knock. A pause that felt longer than it could have been. Knock. Tyler reached out and put his hand on the door panel, like he needed to make sure the world was still physical. Knock. He pulled the truck right onto the shoulder. Nope, he said, voice thin and hot. No. Out. We got out. The wind made the sage in the ditch hiss. The truck's taillights threw long, nervous red onto gravel. There was no one there, nothing within 500 feet except fields and thin trees and a mailbox tilted like it couldn't be bothered. Jenna leaned over and pressed both palms flat to the passenger door. It was in the door, she said. Like it was in the metal. We drove the rest of the way with the radio loud enough to sting. Tyler avoided looking at the windshield, in case anyone noticed the 3 mud circles again. They might have been from Jenna's boots earlier that week. I don't know. We went to the 24-hour diner and sat in a booth under a wide clock that ticked like an old man cleaning. His throat, the waitress poured coffee like she had been pouring coffee for the same kids at the same table for 20 years. And maybe she had. Just different faces. None of us wanted food. Malik kept turning the camcorder over in his hands like he was sick of holding it but didn't know where it belonged if not there. When you have a story you can't explain, you try to file it anyway. You put it under prank or coincidence or dumb teenage panic. You find a place for it because you can't walk around forever with a sharp thing rattling loose in your pocket. We tried to do that. We said iron flexes, expansion, and contraction, and the sound of our own knock bounced funny. We said the wind hit the fence in gusts. We said the audio glitch was the camcorder being cheap. We said the mud circles were old. We said the knocks in the truck were the jack in the trunk bumping against the metal. We tried each one on and none of them fit all the way, but we wore them anyway. Life went to life. There were tests. There was prom. There were 2 weeks where all Malik talked about was a girl named Lee and her Fiat. Stull was a thing in a drawer we avoided opening. Then one night in May, a storm blew up from the southwest, fast and hard, the way it does here when the sky decides to clean a place. Out. Thunder pressed the house in deep breaths. Wind shoved rain sideways like someone angry trying to wipe a table. I was home alone. My mom was working a double at the hospital, and my stepdad was with his trucker brother in Colorado. Our house creaked, like houses do when wind works on them. Somewhere a gate hinge banged. I was half asleep, not fully. Somewhere you can still get to the room if you try. I woke up all the way because there was a knock on the wall next to my bed. The one that shares with the hall. It felt like someone's knuckles were 2 inches from my ear on the other side. Not a show-off bang. A knock you'd use if you didn't want to scare a sleeping person but needed them to wake up anyway. I didn't move. The second knock came lower on the wall by the baseboard. The third came higher, near the picture of my dad at Cheney Lake. I waited for a fourth. There wasn't one. Sometimes the absence of a thing is a noise. I got out of bed like you get into cold water, one part at a time. I opened my door and looked down the hall and saw nothing but the blue wash of lightning, and a bathroom nightlight. I put my hand on the wall. It felt like a wall, that's all. I didn't tell anyone the next day because I wasn't ready to hear it out loud. A week later, Jenna texted me at 1:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Are you awake?" I called her. She was whispering. "It knocked on the basement door," she said. 3 times. My dad got up and checked and there was nothing on the cameras. He told me it was branches. There aren't branches by that door, Evan. 2 days after that, Malik said the mini fridge in his room had rattled 3 times in a way that wasn't a rattle. Not a vibration. 3 separate knocks spaced a little too perfectly. When he opened it, a can inside fell out and sprayed his feet, and he laughed because he didn't know where else to put what he felt. Tyler didn't tell us anything. He said we were spooking ourselves. He was the most superstitious person I knew, which meant he didn't like being the one without control. That summer, on a dry night in July when the heat stayed even after dark like a sleeping dog, we drove back out there in daylight. It was Tyler's idea. "If we see it in the sun," he said, "it'll turn back into a dumb building." The gate was shut and locked with a brand new keep out sign. The grass near the mausoleum had been cut. Without the dark, the place looked small, like seeing the stage after a magic show. The iron bars over the door were realer than anything. I know it's a contradiction to say that. The bars were always real. That day they looked like a decision. One of the straps in the center had a very slight bow outward, not like a dent, more like a tiny convex. It could have been a trick of angle and shadow. I still wake up thinking about it. We didn't go inside the fence. We stood on the road and looked like tourists who didn't want to be seen. A pickup rolled by slow, the kind you only ever see in towns with more churches than restaurants. The man inside looked straight ahead until he was past us. We went to the Casey's again because that's what you do after any trip in Kansas. The girl at the register wasn't the same girl. The new one rang up our drinks and said, "You kids thinking about Stull? Don't. They've been welding things up since last fall. Somebody keeps leaving weird marks." It took my stomach a second to catch up with my throat. That fall we scattered for college and work. The knocking didn't make speeches at us. It came quiet and specific. Once, Jenna heard it on her window at the apartment the second before a transformer blew it. The corner and the glass rippled with blue. When she pulled up her blinds, the wind smacked the panes in triplets. She almost laughed because the timing was stupid and cruel. Malik heard it on a night with no weather at all. 3 noises on the ceiling above his bed like someone walking, heel to toe, deliberately. He texted me, "Did you just get something?" Because sometimes it arrived like a group message, out of sync but bundled. Tyler swore we were exaggerating until he couldn't. He was working late at the co-op, the part where they store fertilizer and seed, and you can drive a forklift like you own the place because at midnight you kind of do. He told me he had stacked the pallets and shut off the forklift and walked to the office door when he heard 3 knocks on the roll-up bay door behind him. He turned expecting someone who'd forgotten their key. There was nobody. He opened the door and rolled it up 2 feet and looked into the hot dark, the kind that collects in big buildings with high ceilings. He set the door down and locked it and said he felt stupid telling me. Then he added, "It sounded like a hand," and there was a silence like the space between lightning and thunder when the storm is right on top of you. Nothing bad happened to him that night. I need to tell you that because stories like this sometimes pretend that every strange sound is a warning of a crash, seconds away. Sometimes you just stand in the middle of the place where you are and hold a set of keys and listen to something, knock 3 times and then nothing happens. And you drive home and brush your teeth and don't talk to your dad about how your heart was a small, fast animal in your throat for an hour for no reason he can see. The winter after that, the knocks stopped for a while, or we stopped listening. Then they came back on a snow day when everything was quiet enough that small sounds sounded like they were in the room with you. I heard them on my bedroom door while I was awake. 3 soft taps spaced out like words. I said, "Who is it?" without standing up because I wanted to feel normal. Nobody answered. In my head, for the first time, I heard the sentence that had been hiding behind all of it. What if the door is not a door? What if the thing knocking doesn't think it is one? Last spring, the sirens went off twice for rotation in a cell a few miles north. I sat in the hall with a pillow over my head because the roof makes its own noises when wind is trying to find a way through it. I dozed like that, upright and stupid. Around 2 a.m, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification from an unknown number. I hit play without thinking. It was 23 seconds of what sounded like a radio trying to find a station. Static, a blip, a scrape, a far thump. 12 seconds in, 3 knocks with space between them, each one not louder than the rest of the noise, just heavier. I deleted it and emptied my voicemail trash and set the phone face down on the carpet. Like that made any difference. Sometimes when nothing has happened for long enough, I think about going back out there with a real camera and a mic and a list of rational explanations. I could tell you weather does strange things to pressure. I could tell you big metal doors flex when their hinges and their frames don't agree. I could tell you sound comes back wrong in small concrete rooms, that our brains build meanings out of patterns, that the rule of 3 is older than any church. I believe all of that, and it does nothing to change what I felt when the iron rounded forward like a skull under a sleeve and the ground pulled at my shoes like it wanted me to stay and listen. There's something else people don't talk about. When they tell this story, they always say the door knocks back like an answer to the dare. That makes it sound like a conversation. Maybe it is. Maybe that's the terrifying part. But sometimes the knocks aren't an answer. Sometimes they come first and you're the one who has to decide if you reply. Think about how many times in a day you knock on something without counting. Think about how your hands already know the rhythm that says, "Is anyone there?" I didn't teach myself to stop knocking. It just happened. I leave notes for delivery. People, because even the idea of 3 light taps on my door makes my throat go tight. You might have driven past Stull and seen a fence and a sign and a field that looks like any other field. You might have stopped your car at night and rolled the window down and laughed with your friends at how quiet the world is. You might think all of us are liars or that we wanted to scare ourselves into mattering. That's fine. If you do go, and you get up close enough to touch the iron, and your hand feels colder than it should and you can taste dust and rain at the same time, and your breath makes a little cloud in air that should be warm, don't knock to prove you aren't scared. Be the kind of person who doesn't reply to strangers in the dark when they ask if you're home. This is the part of the story where I'm supposed to tell you what happened to the boy in the legend, the one who fell. In some versions, he didn't get up. In some, he did and never talked again. In mine, Tyler tripped. He got up with mud on his jeans. He laughed stupid at the fence. He lived. He still won't talk about that night for more than a minute. And if a storm rolls in while you're talking about something else, he'll change the subject in a way that looks like he didn't. The maid of honor at Jenna's wedding told a joke about haunted bathrooms, and you could see Jenna's fingers on the stem of her glass tighten and relax and tighten. Malik is the only one who keeps the camcorder footage, and when he plays it for drunk people, and they ask why the sound goes weird right at the good part, he shrugs like he approves of the cut. There are nights when the wind hits the back of my house and the kitchen door rattles on its latch, and I hear it in my bones before my ears tell me anything. I count because counting turns fear into a task. 1, 2, 3. When I get to 3, something knocks from somewhere I can't name. Not every time. Not even most. Just enough. Just enough to make me stand very still and remember the way iron felt alive under my hand, the way the ground felt soft and sure at the same time, the way the air smelled when the door rounded outward as if pressed by a forehead from inside. They welded bars on the Mausoleum Dare years ago, and I'm told they check them after storms. Sometimes the welds have hairline cracks that look like old spider webs caught in the metal. Sometimes the iron has shallow, round discolorations that wash away in rain. I've never gone close enough to see for myself. Nobody needs me to prove anything. I'm not trying to make you believe in a place. Places don't care if you believe in them. I'm telling you that if you hear 3 knocks, it might be nothing. It might be weather. It might be your house settling, your fridge compressor, your neighbor. Or it might be a conversation that started years ago on a damp night in a small graveyard, where the air felt thick and the ground held onto the weight of our feet like it had been waiting. If you ever go, and if you ever raise your hand and think about making a sound to see what the world will do with it, remember there's a difference between wanting a story and letting one inside. I don't know what knocked back at us. I don't know what has been knocking at me ever since. I do know thunder is supposed to start far away and roll toward you, not the other way around. And I know that on storm nights, when the fields go dark and the dogs go quiet and you can feel the barometric pressure in your teeth, I try not to stand near doors. It seems polite not to be that close when something on the other side is trying to remember how to find you. I'm a cop north of the city. That's as specific as I'm comfortable getting. If you know the area, you'll put it together, but I'm not trying to get my chief's desk lit up with emails from weirdos. This happened last January, during the run of nights when the river air freezes the hairs in your nose and your breath hangs around long enough to look back at you. Our midnight patrol zone wraps around a lot of old stone and older money. We get the usual stuff: bar alarms that blew open, raccoons tripping motion sensors, couples parked where they shouldn't be, a deer in somebody's ornamental boxwoods. It's quiet in that way that invites your head to wander if you don't keep it leashed. My partner that week was Officer Dana Kim. She's sharp, calm, and the kind of person who never raises her voice on the radio because she doesn't have to. We split most nights. One of us runs the business district. The other makes the big loop past the river and the old cemetery, and we trade off every hour to break the monotony. If you think Sleepy Hollow Cemetery sounds like a tourist trap name, you're not wrong, but the place is real. It sprawls up a hill under bare maples and oaks, all iron fences and marble angels, and at the bottom there's the little old church with the graves that date back to names you only see in textbooks. The main gate is heavy and chained at dusk. There's a second pedestrian gate on the north side that's supposed to be welded shut. In summer, local kids still find ways over, no surprise. In winter, it's dead, no pun intended, because the kind of kid who climbs iron in January is rare. Around 23:50, I rolled past the main gate doing 10 miles an hour, windows cracked because the defroster makes me sleepy if the cab gets too warm. The radio was a low murmur. Dispatch Patty chatting with another unit about a disabled sedan on Broadway. My dash clock ticked louder than it needed to. I don't play music on nights, I like to hear my own tires. Snow from an earlier squall had turned to a skin of ice over the patches of grass and stone. My headlights washed over the big stone pillars, and the locked chain that keeps the gate shut then swung back to the road. If you're waiting for me to say I saw something then, I didn't. I heard it. It came in soft under the engine rumble, like the sound crawled in through one of the seams in the door and set up behind my ear. A kid crying. Not the performative wail you hear in a grocery store when somebody's mom says no to candy. This was the small, sharp kind of crying that rides on quick breaths. It was close enough that for a second I thought it was in the back seat, and my whole body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. I braked, rolled my window all the way down. The cruiser's engine ticked in the cold. I killed it. No lights, no radio, nothing but the thin hiss of the river a ways off, and the little ice crystals snapping in the trees when the wind turned a branch. The crying kept going. 3 beats, a hitch, 3 beats, a little gulp, like the way my daughter used to do when she fell off the porch steps at 5. I don't have a daughter. That's the part that hit me a second later, like my brain tried to pull a file that didn't exist and flagged itself. I don't have kids. I've been divorced long enough to stop correcting people when they see the tan line on my ring finger and assume I'm married to the job. So the fact that the crying landed that specific is something I still can't make pretty for my own comfort. Unit 2-1, I said into the shoulder mic, keeping my voice mild, a Sunday afternoon tone. I'm out checking the north side of the cemetery. Possible juvenile. 2-1 copy, Patty said. You can hear a smile in her voice even at midnight. 2-3 you copy? 2-3 copies, Dana said. I'm in the south loop. I'll swing by the church. You want me to start at the bottom gate? Negative, I said. Let me check the main first. It's not the strangest thing for a kid to end up where they shouldn't in our town, even at night. Custody drama can go dark. Teens run away with big plans and small coats. We've had worse reasons. My brain did all that math as my feet hit pavement. I grabbed the flashlight off its charger and stepped out. The cold bit straight through the uniform pants. I'm not a small guy, and it still felt like the air pushed right through me. The beam crossed the chain and the lock. Both looked undisturbed. Fresh powder would have told me if someone had crossed, but the snow had a crust and the ground nearest the gate was scabbed with sand and salt from the plows. The crying had stopped the second the car died. That pinged me. Animals and people have a rhythm. This was like a sound effect button someone took their finger off of. I leaned into the bars and played the light down the main lane. The marble angels threw back pale blue. The lamps along the path were the old kind that looked like gas lights. Wired electric now, and they made little yellow cups in the dark where the snow hadn't stuck. It looked like what it is. Quiet land full of names. I stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds just listening. Just when I felt stupid. And that feeling is louder than anything on a midnight shift. The crying returned from deeper inside off my right. One short cry, then a little breath, then another. Kiddo, I said loud enough to carry. Hey, I'm a police officer. You're not in trouble. Call out to me. It changed. I don't have a pretty word for it. The crying turned left, twisted, threw a smile that didn't belong on it and popped out as laughter. Not a belly laugh, not nervous giggling. It was high, quick, full of sugar. It bounced. The only thing I can compare it to is the way a wind chime tinks when the wind does a lazy finger across it. It moved. That's the part people tell me I'm exaggerating when I talk about this. It moved like a small thing hopping from stone to stone, around me but not touching. 2-1, Dana said in my ear. You still on the north gate? Yeah, I said, watching my breath shred in the cold. I'm hearing. It might be a recording. Might be somebody messing with a Bluetooth speaker in there. I'm going to walk the fence line. Wait for me, she said. She never says that. I'm a minute out. Copy. I clicked back, then leaned into the bars again. Okay, enough games, I said to the dark, because the human brain always decides it's a person first. You're trespassing. If you're a kid, I'm going to help you get home. If you're not, you're going to get a summons and your parents are going to meet me at the station. The laughter answered me from my left now. Same distance, same volume. If you've ever been in a big empty gym and someone clapped, you know how it fills space and then dies. This didn't die. It just hopped over and started up again, like it had always been there. I know the rules for opening locked property. I didn't have bolt cutters in the trunk. The grounds crew locks the gates with their own chain and we don't keep a key on patrol, so I put my hands around the bars, set my boot on the lower rung, and hauled myself up. The metal shivered under my gloves. The top of that gate is spiked to discourage exactly what I did next. I swung a leg over and moved carefully, one hand pressed flat on the cold top rail. The laughter skittered ahead like it was leading me. On the other side, the cold air felt different. I don't know how to write that without sounding like a campfire narrator, but it did. Maybe it was the wind shadow of the hill. Maybe it was me. The snow had a crust I could break if I set my weight wrong. So I went slow, flashlight sweeping low. I aimed for the path and followed the curve of the old iron fence inside, telling myself I'd catch some little jerk crouched with a UE boom and an Instagram live going. I told myself I'd be annoyed, and I believed it enough to keep my feet moving. There's a section up near the top where they put the kids 100 years ago. You'll know it if you ever walk there because the Yao statues are smaller and gentler, lamb-like things, carved books left half open, little hands held by grown-up marble. It's creepy during the day and sad at sunset. At midnight in January, it's the kind of still that forgets you're in it. That's where it led me. I didn't know that until later. In the moment, all I had was the hop-skip of that laughter and the white circles of my breath floating like balloons in the beam. About 30 yards in, my radio hissed a line of static and then cleared. 2-1, I'm at the church, Dana said. I can see your unit at the top. I'm coming up on foot. Copy, I said, and my voice sounded higher to my own ear. It bothered me enough that I cleared my throat. Bring the key if you have one. I do. Singleton gave me his last summer, she said. Hold up, okay? I didn't. This is the part where I wish I could say I did the smart thing and waited. I kept walking. The laughter lifted ahead of me again, landed to my right, ticked around behind. Every time it moved, my spine felt like someone drew a coin down it. The flashlight hit names and dates and little bronze flower vases welded to stone, half buried in old snow. I walked past a statue that I swear I've never seen, even though I've been in that cemetery 100 times. An angel whose mouth isn't quite right. A bit too open, like the sculptor hadn't finished the last cut. The sound landed in front of my right ear like a fly. It was that close. My knees locked. That's not a figure of speech. The muscles did what they do when you're about to fall on ice and stop your own legs from moving without asking your opinion. The sensation went up into my stomach, then my ribs. My flashlight dropped a little. The laughter didn't increase, in volume or pitch. It just was. The fine hair inside my ear prickled. I backed my head a fraction because it felt exactly like a kid cupping their hand near your ear when they're about to whisper a secret too loud. I brought the flashlight up to where the sound lined up and there was nothing. The beam dusted snow in the air and it looked like confetti in a parade, and then I realized I had raised my sidearm too. I don't remember drawing it. That scared me in a way the sound hadn't. We train not to point unless we intend to shoot, regardless of ghosts or pranks. I pressed the muzzle down toward the path and forced a breath through my teeth. That's enough, I said. My voice came from the back of my neck. The laughter jumped left, hit the top of a little headstone no taller than my knee, and bounced to my right. I followed it with the light, again finding nothing but the white rectangle of the stone and a name so worn my mind filled in the letters. Annabel something. 1904. You can take your pick. The year was clear, even if the rest wasn't. The ground around that stone had a tiny dip, like the earth had exhaled a long time ago and hadn't taken a full breath since. More than fear, I felt pissed. It's not noble to say that, but it's honest. I had a partner hustling up an icy hill because I said I heard a kid, and I had an empty path and something putting its breath in my ear in a place that deserves quiet. I said, still keeping my gun pointed down and away, knock it off, last warning. The laughter did not stop. It turned into a tune. I didn't recognize it as anything real, just the up-down of a child singing something without words, like they're making the melody up as they go. It went 3 notes, then 2, then 3 again. It circled me clockwise and made the hairs under my hat stand up like they were trying to leave my head. I fired into the ground. It was autopilot. I had enough control to angle the muzzle away from any stones and away from my own boots. The shot cracked across the hill and busted the night open. My ears rang even with the muffs on. Hot grit stung my shins. The laughter stopped in a hard instant, clipped like a wire cut with pliers. A drift of displaced snow settled. Somewhere below in town, 2 dogs barked at each other, the way they do over news 4 seconds old. I stood there with my pistol down, breathing hard and furious, and counted to 10 because that's what you do when you don't trust yourself. I holstered, picked up my flashlight, and washed the beam across where I'd shot. The bullet had chewed a divot in the hard dirt, darker under the frost. I saw a curl of something like paper near the edge. When I nudged it with the toe of my boot, it wasn't paper. It was a thin, brittle ribbon, pink, sun-faded, the kind you tie around a ponytail. It split when I touched it, the way things do when they've been rained on for years and then frozen. 2-1, Dana said. Closer now, breath puffing in her words. What was that? Accidental discharge, I said. And it wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Ground. No property damage. I met her at the bend in the path a minute later. Her eyebrows went up when she saw my face. You look like you ran a mile. Slipped coming over, I said, which again wasn't totally untrue. We walked the section together. We didn't hear anything. It was 1 a.m. by then and felt like 3. We did the responsible thing and cleared the whole perimeter of the children's section, then the lower paths, then the fence. Footprints? Just ours. Gate lock? Still secure. I told her what I'd heard in the general terms you use when you don't want to sound like a rookie. She looked up toward the hilltop where the big family mausoleums sit and said, Sound carries? Here, you know that. The river and the hill do that weird amphitheater thing. Sure, I said. It moved, though. Echoes move. She said it quickly, like she wanted to get ahead of whatever else I might put words to. She crouched, where I'd shot, and pointed the flashlight. Careful with that. The pink ribbon was in 2 pieces. She clicked the light off and on. Could have been there, she said. Could have been 8 years old and you kicked it and it snapped. Either way, stop shooting cemeteries. The sergeant's going to make you write an essay on muzzle discipline. We laughed because the alternative felt too big in that moment. We cleared out, logged a field contact with a note about possible prank callers, and went on to deal with a bar close that produced 1 drunk who insisted he was allergic to handcuffs. I told myself I wouldn't think about the laughter again. That worked until right before I fell asleep at 10 a.m., when the silence in my apartment felt like a mouth. I swung through the cemetery on my own the next morning around 10 because I told myself I wanted to apologize to the groundskeeper if my round had kicked up somebody's great-grandmother. The sun was high and thin and made the snow look like ground glass. The chain was off the gate, and the old Ford the grounds crew uses was parked by the tool shed. The head groundsman is a guy named Frank who knows more about the history of that hill than the museum docents. He was tightening his screws on a hinge when I walked up. You again? He said, squinting from under his wool cap. Singleton said you came over the gate last night. I did, I said. Apologies for that. We heard something. I fired a warning shot. Down. It won't happen again. He grunted. Not my gate. Town's gate. I just repainted every spring. Come on, tell me where, and we'll go look. He said it like we were going to see where my stupid had landed, and then he'd hand me a broom. We walked up to the spot I remembered by the curve in the path and the knee-high stone with the lamb on it. I went to point at the little divot I'd made, but Frank didn't look there. He was standing with his boots planted and his hands on his hips, staring at the grave just ahead of that, the one with the barely there name. He lowered himself down slow and put his fingertips on the base of the stone like he was checking a sleeping kid's forehead. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, very soft. "What?" He gestured without taking his hand away. "See that? The tilt." It was subtle, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. The stone had canted a good half-inch forward, enough to cast a different shadow on the snow, enough to look wrong if you were a man who looked at straight lines all day. The earth at the base had a crescent of fresh dirt showing, dark and damp, against the white. "Ground heave?" I said. "Freeze-thaw?" "We've had freeze-thaw every winter since the county was born," he said, his breath making a little engine of white. "This stone hasn't moved in my 22 years. The cribbing below it is still good. We reset this section last June. You can check my log." He slid his fingers along the base again, frowning. "You said you shot the ground, not the stone." "Correct," I said. "Show me." He pointed. I pointed to the spot. The little divot was there like I remembered, raw dirt inside a jag of ice. He crouched over that too, less interested. "You dig up a ribbon," he said without looking back. What? He touched the pink strip of fabric by the hole with the tip of a gloved finger. It had refrozen where it lay. Plastic of some kind. Modern. Not from the 1900s. Somebody leaves things. They always do. You get doll heads sometimes. People think that's cute. It isn't. He stood. "Anyway, we'll re-level this stone in spring. I'll note the shift." "Frank," I said, and I don't know why I leaned in like I didn't. "Want the other stones to hear? Have you ever heard kids up here?" He gave me a look that started skeptical and faded to something like patience. "There's a school at the bottom of the hill. On a warm day, you'll hear them at recess. You'll also hear coyotes that sound like all manner of things they aren't. People hear what they bring with them. You brought a gun last night. Gates open in daylight. You want to walk? Walk." He left me there. I stood a long time, reading the names on stones that belonged to babies who never got to be bad at algebra. I told myself I was making a shape, out of coincidence. I told myself the noise was a Bluetooth prank or a radio interference. I cataloged rational things because that's how I stay upright in a job that shows you irrational things. 2 nights later, we were back on mids. Dana took the business loop. I took the river and the hill. I didn't plan on going up there, but the wheel will sometimes take you where your brain wants, even if your mouth says you're over it. I kept the windows up. I told myself it was because the temperature had dropped. I rolled past the gate at 0.17 with the heat on low and the radio burbling, someone asking where to get a salted pretzel at this hour. I didn't hear anything. I kept going. At ER 023, dispatch Patty sent me a welfare check on a woman in one of the apartments over the restaurant row. Her neighbor hadn't seen her lights on all day and she usually kept them on. I knocked, talked to her through the door, verified she was okay, took a complaint about the neighbor minding her business, apologized. When I came back down the stairwell, a kid laughed. It was the same laugh. I knew it like you know your own ringtone in a crowd. It echoed around the cement, ricocheted off the electrical panel and picked up a little metallic twang from the railings. I froze, listened, heard only a television, 2 floors up and somebody's faucet. The hallway smelled like damp carpet and fried onions. I stood there longer than I needed to and then forced myself to move. I didn't say anything to Dana when I cleared the call. What would I have said? Hey, the laugh from the graveyard just followed me to a building with a locked front door and nobody in the hall. I didn't say that. I did the next 4 hours like a robot. Car checks, a couple of people sleeping. In lobbies, a guy insisting his ex stole his coat when it was on the back of his chair. And then at 04:15, I pulled into the station lot and just sat there with the engine idling, feeling stupid and wired. Sleep after a night like that is not sleep. It's being dead for 4 hours and then waking to your own hand twitching. I had a dream I was standing at the base of that angel with the two open mouth, and I could hear a kid laughing, but every time I turned, the sound moved behind me, and my feet suctioned into the ground. The angel bent, a slow hinge like someone had put a string on the back of its head and was pulling. I woke up with my mouth open and my teeth cold. I made coffee in the dark and watched steam climb. This could be where I say it stopped. That would make my life easier. It didn't. It shifted. The next instances were small, and that makes it worse. The TV in the report room glitched for a second while a hockey game was on and tossed out the same three-note tune over the play-by-play. So faint I thought I imagined it until Sergeant Rourke said, "What was that?" and smacked the side of the set. The radio in my unit stuttered to static when I drove past the chain at the cemetery, and inside that static I heard a high sound. Maybe air, maybe not. The baby monitor at my sister's house. I was there on my day off helping her. Move a dresser. Went from white noise to 3 bright chirps that made her dog stand up and bark at the ceiling. I laughed then because you have to pick at it or it picks at you, and my sister asked, "What?" And I said, "Nothing, it's fine," and put my hand on the dresser to keep it from moving under my grip. I went back to the cemetery alone, off duty, 3 weeks later. I told myself I wanted to pay for the resetting of the stone, even if Frank had told me not to worry about it. The day was sharp and blue, the kind of winter day that tricks you into thinking it's nicer than it is. The ground was as hard as poured concrete. The gate was open for daytime visitors. Maybe 10 cars dotted the lower lot. 2 older women in black coats moved from plot to plot with flowers. A young couple with matching hats walked the path holding hands and reading names like they were cataloging the past for fun. I walked straight to the children's section, feeling stupid and a little like a teenager, and stopped 3 steps before the tilted stone. It wasn't tilted anymore. Frank had straightened it. The dirt at the base was neat, tamped smooth with that little whirl pavers leave when they turn with their boot heel. Someone had stuck a small pinwheel in the ground there. It didn't make sense. It was winter. There was barely a breath of wind up on the hill, but it turned a fraction anyway. A lazy tick like a clock unsure of itself. I crouched, and the world narrowed to my breath and the faint squeak of the pinwheel turning. I thought about dropping a coin. You see that in places. People leave pennies for the little ones. I had one on me. I don't know why I thought it mattered, but I did. I laid the coin on the top right corner of the stone, the way my grandmother used to place a quarter on the corner of a newspaper to keep the pages from flapping. I stood, put my hands in my pockets, and watched my own stupid little ritual like it might do anything for anyone. Someone behind me laughed, not loud, not up, in my ear. Just enough that the person with the matching hat looked up, then looked back down at their phone. I turned. Nobody was close enough that the sound could have come from them without them smiling at me about the joke. The air smelled like cold iron and the faint ghost of someone's perfume. I turned back to the stone. The coin was gone. I didn't see it fall. I didn't hear it hit the ground. Maybe it dropped. Maybe it skittered. Maybe the lip of the stone is slick and my gloves didn't lay it flat. I crouched again, scanning the dirt and the snow. The coin wasn't on the ground. I didn't find it in the grass. I brushed my fingertips over the top of the stone, then stopped because touching it felt wrong, like putting your fingers on a sleeping kid's face when they aren't yours. "You all right?" Frank said behind me. He moves quiet for a man his size. "Yeah," I said. "I was just..." He looked at the pinwheel. He looked at my hands. He looked at me. He shook his head. "You guys," he said, and he didn't mean anything cruel by it. "You come up here and you want it to be something. There are places it is, there are places it isn't. This hill gets both. Go get lunch. Take the long way down. If you want to hear kids, go by the playground." On my way down the path, the pinwheel turned again even though the air was still. If I was making a podcast of my own story, I'd add a sound there, a little bell, the 3 notes. I didn't hear anything. I walked to my car and felt a light buzzing at the base of my skull, the way you feel when you've been in a room with fluorescent lights too long and your brain's tired of being bathed in their hum. Told one person the full thing, Dana, Because she was there for the shot and because she reads people for a living and tells the truth in the fewest words. We were at the diner we always go to between shifts, watching a line of pancakes become someone's entire day. I dropped it in pieces the way you do when you don't want to watch a friend recalibrate her opinion of you in real time. When I got to the coin, she put her fork down and said, "Andy," then stopped. Her face did a weird thing where you could see two ideas fight. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay." "That's it?" I said. "Okay. What do you want me to say?" She buttered the last bite of toast with unnecessary precision. "We work around grief for a living. There's a whole hill of it over there. It's older than our uniforms. You heard something. You reacted in a way that was appropriate at the time. Nobody got hurt. Frank fixed the stone. You're not haunted. You're tired." "You heard the static that night," I said. "I did." "And you told me echoes move," I said. "They do." She looked at the stainless steel coffee pot like it might ask for her badge number. "So do other things." We let the silence take its turn. Outside, our unit sat in the slush, light bars clean and quiet for once. "You can stop here if you need the tidy." Guy hears something weird in a cemetery famous for a story people like to tell. Fires a warning shot. Groundskeeper scolds him. His partner reminds him the world is round and people have brains made of old rocks. That's a good ending. It's the one I tried to keep for a few months until I worked a spring fair where a dozen kids wore the same pink ribbon tied at the end of their braids, and a gust of clean river air made them all lift and wave at once, like a little field. And I caught myself looking for one ribbon that didn't attach to a head. The last thing I'll tell you is from 2 weeks ago. We had a storm roll up the river, not a blizzard, just wet snow that stuck to the iron and made everything look sketched heavier. I had the north loop near midnight again. I didn't stop at the gate. I told myself I was all done feeding whatever this was with attention. I drove on. The radio was quiet the way you can feel in your bones, like the whole town had been told to hold still for a second. At the corner by the church, my dash cam glitched. It happens. Cold makes wires stupid. The screen went black and then landed on a blue system page with text I couldn't read for a half second. And in that half second, the cruiser's interior filled with a sound like a child trying not to laugh in church. The exact 3 notes, 2 notes, 3 I've been hearing in real life and then in my head since January. It came from nowhere and everywhere. The vent, the back seat, the wire coiled under the dash, the mic on my shoulder. My whole body did. The knee lock thing again, and I hate that it has a name in my head now. The screen clicked back to normal. The road was the road. The church was the church. I swear to you, the air in the car changed. Not warmer, not colder. Denser, like I could press my hand into it and leave a dent. The smell that came with it was old and clean at the same time, like the drawer where somebody keeps their Sunday handkerchiefs. I pulled over without meaning to. My hand was on the shifter and then it wasn't. I looked at the empty back seat, then at the passenger seat, and said, out loud, because sometimes that makes the rules reassert themselves, "If there's a kid, I can help you. I can call someone. You have to say your name." It laughed. Not beside my ear. Not in the crawl spaces of the car. Outside the windshield, just beyond the wipers, out where the snow made soft circles in the beam of the low beams. The sound rode the flakes, bounced off the glass, and came back into me like breath on breath. I didn't draw my weapon. I didn't even reach for my flashlight. My left hand sat on my leg and had weight like it was somebody else's hand. I said, "That's not funny," because I didn't know what else to say. It stopped. I waited. I realized I was holding my shoulders up around my ears and deliberately lowered them 1 inch. The wipers squeaked. The engine ticked. A train down in the valley blew once, thin. I let the car idle. I didn't turn it off. I didn't get out. I didn't go in. I put the transmission back in drive and rolled forward. When I came up past the main gate, I glanced left in spite of myself. The chain hung like it always does, slack loop and lock in the middle. The snow had dusted it silver. A dark little shape sat on the top rail of the gate where it meets the post. A coin. A penny because I could see the brown even at night under the sodium vapor light. It wasn't balanced. It wasn't lodged. It lay flat, as if there was a lip. There I couldn't see. I slowed like an idiot because that's what a brain does when it wants to look at a thing without putting its face right up to the glass. The penny didn't move. The air around it felt thick even through the window. I didn't stop. I didn't go back in the morning to check if it had fallen into the snow or if Frank had pocketed it and told himself I left it there for luck. I haven't asked him. I don't want to make it a conversation again because then it's a whole thing, and I'll be back up there with my hands on cold stone, building a circle around myself out of nothing. If you're waiting for the last line where a kid's voice comes through the wall right now and says my name, you'll be disappointed. I haven't heard my name. That feels important in a boundary way. My badge number, though. A week ago, Dispatch Patty laughed when she picked up a deadline and said, 2-1, quit pocket keying your mic. You're breathing in my ear. I checked my shoulder mic. The button wasn't depressed. There's a tiny scuff on the plastic. Over the number plate on my chest where I saw later, a smear of something like old bubble gum for a second before it disappeared. I cleaned it. It didn't smear. It just wasn't there after I looked away and looked back. You tell me if that's my head. It's past midnight while I'm typing this. I'm off tonight. The river is a dark line out my window. The heat in my apartment knocks and settles in its old building way. I think about the moment right after the shot where the laughter cut off like I'd flicked a switch, and the way the stone leaned forward the next morning like something inside the earth braced a hand and pushed up in a hurry, surprised, alarmed, like the word says. I think about the ribbon splitting, I think about the coin I didn't see hit the ground, and I think about the way the laughter isn't angry. Not exactly. It's delighted. That's worse. It's the laugh a kid makes when they get away with hiding behind the couch for longer than you thought they could hold still. I'm not telling you this to convince you of anything. I'm telling you because I kept it in my mouth too long and it tasted like copper. If you go up there after dark, you'll be on foot because the gate's chained, and that's good. Your steps will slow you down. Your brain will keep pace. If you hear a kid in a place that hasn't had one who needs help for 100 years, use your radio first and your gun last. And if something breathes a laugh into your right ear and you feel your knees lock, look straight ahead and say your name the way you'd say it to a teacher taking attendance. Say it like it belongs to you. Say it like it's louder than 3 notes and 2 and 3 again. Skipping from stone to stone, circling you without getting tired. That's what I do now. Most nights it's quiet. Some nights the quiet has teeth. On those nights I turn the heat down, crack the window, and let the cold in on purpose. The air comes in clean and thin, and it makes the sounds in the room. Decide what they are. The radiator is a radiator. The wind is the wind. And if in that thin air I hear a laugh slide across the floorboards like it's trying not to wake anyone, I sit still and put my hand on my knee so it doesn't float. And I listen until it either goes away or it doesn't. I'm not a priest. I'm not a ghost hunter. I'm a cop. I do the loop, I check the gates, I call in what I see. And in the morning, sometimes the ground shows a little dark crescent of dirt at the base of things that didn't used to tilt, like the world shifted, a fraction while we were all inside keeping warm.